One-man show. Every crime is unthinkable and monstrous. However, some atrocities defy the slightest explanation and comprehension. They shock with their cruelty, recklessness, and lack of principles. I dare say you have never heard anything like this before. This new story takes us to Costa Mesa, California, USA. The prosecutor in the case stated that everything turned out differently than it seemed. Even the craziest Hollywood screenwriters couldn't have come up with such an ending, confessed Matt Murphy in an interview. Double disappearance. The events involve several people. The key figures are 26-year-old Samuel Herr and 23-year-old Julie Kibuishi. The young people disappeared on May 21, 2010. Their families sounded the alarm when they heard nothing from them the next day. By midday, the Kibuishi family contacted the police, reporting that their daughter was not answering calls or messages. However, the police responded that Julie was an adult and didn't have to check in, especially over the weekend, and suggested waiting a bit longer. Unfortunately, a few hours later, the family's fears were confirmed. The police reported that the young woman was no longer alive. Stephen Herr, Sam's father, often visited his son. After serving in Afghanistan, Sam exhibited symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Although not officially diagnosed, his parents were concerned. They called, invited him over, or visited him themselves. They hadn't heard from Sam for 2 days, and he even missed a planned dinner, which was unusual for the former military man known for his responsibility and discipline. His family had a bad feeling, so Mr. Herr decided to check on his son. The door to his apartment was open, heightening his concern. As he entered, it initially seemed the place was empty. But soon, Steve realized someone was in the bedroom. Approaching closer, he saw a young woman lying on the bed. Her pants were torn, and there was a message written in marker on her back. "All yours, damn it." The stranger was motionless and appeared to be lifeless. The bedding was stained with blood, and bullet wounds marred the back of her head. Realizing something terrible had occurred, the man called emergency services. Paramedics confirmed severe head injuries and, consequently, the young woman's demise. Later, her identity was confirmed as Julie Kibuishi. Her purse and documents were on the kitchen table. While specialists examined the crime scene, Mr. Herr searched the apartment for his son, fearing he, too, might be in danger. Despite the apparent circumstances, he couldn't believe Sam was involved. His parental intuition told him Sam couldn't have done this. Most likely his home was attacked, and he was taken. Original version. Unlike the father, the police held a different opinion. Law enforcement officers considered the young man a likely suspect. Being a former military member, he was well versed in handling firearms and might have had a gun in his possession. It was possible that an argument occurred between the young people, during which he lost control and deprived the girl of life. It's also well known that after military service, soldiers' mental health can be precarious. However, Sam's family stated that he had quickly adjusted to civilian life and did not exhibit aggression. Nonetheless, his relatives did not hide the fact that they supported him in every way possible after his return from service, even keeping spare keys and having access to his personal account just in case. Close friends. Samuel Herr was in the military and was known for his positive traits. Kind-hearted, a man of his word, and a loyal friend. In 2010, he returned home on a doctor's recommendation. Being frugal, he had saved about $60,000 during his service. He settled down and built a life. Sam dreamed of continuing his military career and earning an officer's rank, which led him to enroll in Orange Coast College with ease. There, the new student made friends. An aspiring designer. The young people studied anthropology together, quickly becoming friends and spending time together. Despite Julie being an only child, she was not spoiled. Her family described her as a cheerful and responsive girl, interested in dance and student theater. It was well known that there was no romantic relations. The combat veteran had been in a long-term relationship with a girl named Katarina. Living in Germany, the couple visited each other frequently. They took turns staying at each other's homes. Katarina was set to graduate the following year, after which they planned to move in together and marry. Julie was also in a relationship. Her significant other lived in Japan, and they regularly communicated via the internet. The main characters of this story were like brother and sister, supporting and helping each other. All the more shocking, especially since Julie's body was found under unmistakable circumstances. It gave the impression she had been taken advantage of, tarnishing Sam's previously impeccable reputation with suspicion. Moreover, something unexpected soon came to light. In his teenage years, Sam was suspected in a crime. According to police records, a young man had been brutally beaten by a group and later succumbed to his injuries. Members of a rival gang were suspected in the attack, and Sam was believed to have been among them. However, all charged dropped, yet Sam spent an entire year under investigation. This fact solidified police suspicions of his propensity for violence and dubious connections to the criminal world. Investigation. While some police officers were focused on searching for the young man, others were piecing together the sequence of events. Officers were aided by Julie's mobile phone found in her purse. By examining the device, they discovered that the young people had been in communication throughout the day. At 2:45 p.m., Sam mentioned he had gone to a friend's place to help with something, without going into details. He also shared with his friend that he planned a weekend trip out of town. However, around 11 p.m., he sent another text. Sam wanted to meet up and seemed upset. He asked Julie to come over around midnight to talk. That evening, Julie was meeting with her cousin and his fiancé. They had dinner at a restaurant and discussed the upcoming wedding, where Julie was to be a bridesmaid. After receiving Sam's message, she hurried over. Upon arriving, Julie sent her last text message, informing her brother she had arrived and mentioned hearing sobbing behind the door. Unaware of the danger, she walked into a deadly trap. Detectives believed Sam returned home under the influence, perhaps troubled by something and wanting to vent. Since Katerina wasn't around, he reached out to his college friend. During the conversation, something went wrong, causing him to become angry and attack the young woman. However, one thing remained unclear. If he sought intimacy, why end her life? There was nothing indicating that Julie resisted. Her body bore no defensive marks, and the house was in order, with everything in its place. The strange message left on Julie's back hinted at a crime motivated by jealousy, possibly stemming from a love triangle. But if that were the case, who was the message meant for? To substantiate this theory, physical evidence was needed: the weapon, fingerprints, or DNA traces. But most importantly, investigators needed to find Sam and talk to him. Unexpected twist. A week later, Sam Herr was found on May 29, 2010. Unfortunately, speaking with him was not possible. He was no longer alive and had been dismembered. His head and some body parts were discovered in El Dorado Park, while his torso was found at Liberty Theater on the Joint Forces training base in Los Alamitos. After the terrible news was shared with his family, his parents were outraged, blaming the police and media for their bias. Stephen insisted he knew his son was innocent, but others realized this too late. In that time, a shadow of doubt was cast over the honorable serviceman's name. Though it was eventually cleared, it came at a great cost. The guy in the baseball cap. A few days before the grim discovery, during the investigation, detectives tracked activity on Sam's bank accounts. If he was on the run, he would need cash. The detective's intuition was correct. The day after the crime, large sums were withdrawn from the suspect's card. However, surveillance cameras at the ATMs captured someone else. The individual turned out to be 16-year-old Wesley Freilich. The trail of the boy in the baseball cap was quickly picked up. He ordered pizza for home delivery and paid using the suspect's card. During questioning, the teenager appeared confused and didn't understand what was happening. When asked by officers how he got the card, he explained he had never met Sam and was hearing about him for the first time. He admitted receiving the card from 26-year-old Daniel Wozniak, who told him the card's owner was in jail and needed cash. Wesley knew Daniel well and decided to help. Without hesitation, he withdrew about $2,000 at various places and handed the money to Daniel, who let him buy a pizza in gratitude. The actor. Wesley and Daniel performed together in a community theater. The teenager openly admired Daniel's talent and charisma. However, acting didn't pay well, so Wozniak lived modestly but ambitiously. A few months ago, he proposed to his colleague, 22-year-old Rachel Buffett, who accepted. They were inseparable and appeared to be a strong couple, with their wedding ceremony just around the corner. When police decided to arrest the actor, it was at the worst possible moment, during his bachelor party. Needless to say, the young man was not pleased. On May 26th, during questioning, he admitted knowing Sam and had seen him a few days earlier. It turned out they were neighbors in the same apartment complex, which included not only living spaces, but also a pool, gym, recreation area, and barbecue spot. Fate brought them together at the beginning of 2010, and since then they occasionally hung out. In his testimony, Dan stated that he withdrew money from Sam's card at Sam's personal request. Dan claimed there was some shady scheme he was drawn into, which he deeply regretted. According to him, his neighbor asked him to withdraw cash and then report the card stolen to the bank to request a refund. In this situation, Sam supposedly promised Wozniak a good percentage, and since Dan was in dire need of money, he didn't refuse the dubious offer. I agreed, but I decided to ask Wesley to do it, so my face wouldn't appear on the surveillance camera and connect me to the fraud, Daniel explained. He also added that he last saw his friend in a car, accompanied by a man in a black baseball cap. He didn't know where they went. Interestingly, his fiancée told the same story, but their accounts sounded unconvincing, and Daniel was noticeably nervous. Therefore, the detectives decided to wait a bit before pressing him again. New information. At this time, the radio station was contacted by a local jazz musician named Chris. He said he knew Wozniak well and had loaned him $2,000 for rent a couple of weeks ago. On May 21st at 10:30 a.m., Dan asked Chris to stop by his home to pick up the money. However, instead of the full amount, he gave only $400, warning that it was all he had and promised to call as soon as he had more. During this time, Daniel, Rachel, and another person were present. Later, Chris recognized him as Sam Herr, the man from the news everyone was looking for. On the morning of May 22nd, Daniel contacted Chris again and repaid the debt. Upon learning the new details, Sam's parents had a false hope that their son was alive and being held hostage. However, this was not the case. After the witness shared this information, Dan presented another version of events. During the second interrogation, he said that on the morning of May 22nd, Sam came to him, appearing frantic. When asked what happened, Sam confessed he had done something foolish and ended the life of his friend. In response, Dan advised him to go to the police, but Sam threatened that if anyone else found out, there would be problems not only for him, but also for Daniel and Rachel. Fearing for his life, the new suspect did everything Sam ordered. He drove him to the specified address, after which the former soldier handed over his credit card, stating he no longer needed it, and that it would come in handy for the couple. Wozniak admitted he was confused at the time and didn't know how to act. He knew well that Sam had served in combat and expected anything from him. When asked by the investigator why he changed his testimony, the actor explained that he was afraid, supposedly fearing he might be held accountable as an accomplice. Fatal mistake. However, the detectives didn't believe Daniel Wozniak's story. It was clear he was hiding something, being evasive, and trying to justify himself. When the detectives asked for a DNA sample to rule him out as a suspect, he went silent. After some time, he admitted he had been in Sam's apartment and had seen the crime scene firsthand, which meant he could have left traces. I knew Sam had a stash of money, so I decided to take it since he was on the run, Daniel explained his actions. At the same time, he swore he didn't end Julie's life, even though all the evidence seemed to point to him. By this point, the detective's suspicions had solidified. It was obvious that the suspect was lying. So the authorities decided to use the well-practiced good cop, bad cop method. Eventually, Daniel's position weakened and he was officially reclassified as a suspect, alongside Sam, who still hadn't been found. Thus, the investigation considered that several people might have been involved in Julie's crime. The final piece of the puzzle came from a conversation between Rachel and Dan. Apparently, Rachel didn't realize they were being monitored and made a big mistake. Throughout Wozniak's arrest, his fiancée was unusually calm, as though the cancelled wedding didn't upset her, suggesting she knew more than she let on. Her involvement in the crime wasn't ruled out. During a visit, Rachel told Dan that she had given a backpack to Dan's brother, as he had asked. The recording of the conversation was added to the case file and played in court, becoming a key piece of evidence. The show is over. After talking to his fiancée, the suspect was called in by investigators. The young man appeared confused and cornered, seemingly realizing it was over and denying was pointless. So he confessed to everything at once. As he spoke, he grew more confident, occasionally smiling. He began his confession by saying, "I ended both their lives because I'm crazy." He then described his perfect crime. On May 21st, he asked Herr to help move things in the theater's attic, which Sam agreed to as he never refused to help. When Sam turned away, Daniel shot him in the back. Sam didn't immediately understand what had happened, likely never realizing he had become a victim of his friend. In pain, he fell to the floor, remaining conscious, and asked Dan to check what had hit him and help him up. Instead, Daniel approached and shot him in the head. Then, Daniel left the body in the attic and went to perform on stage. After successfully completing the show, he returned to the crime scene and used a saw and an axe to dismember the former soldier's body. Later that evening, he sent Julie a message from Sam's phone, asking to meet. She immediately responded to the request. When she arrived, he pretended to sob behind the door, then let her in and asked her to come to the bedroom. There, he shot the unfortunate woman twice in the back of the head. But that wasn't enough for the scoundrel. He decided to stage an assault and tore her pants, leaving a provocative message on her shirt. He wanted to divert suspicion and tarnish his friend's reputation. The next day, Wozniak approached Wesley, then returned to the theater, where he calmly put the body parts into bags. Some of them, including the head, were placed in a large bag and dumped in the park, not even bothering to bury the remains. During his account, Dan mentioned that he found his actions amusing. He then revealed where he had left the pieces. Despite his confession, Wozniak didn't consider himself guilty and requested a lawyer. Upon hearing the criminal's version, the detectives proposed their own. They believed they were dealing with a cold, calculating criminal, not a madman. He executed his monstrous plan for financial gain. It was known that he needed money and had significant debts. He also wanted to have a lavish wedding, but lacked the funds. Perhaps during one of their gatherings, Sam had confided in him about having a substantial amount of money in his account, which sparked Daniel's bloodthirsty plan. He decided to frame Herr and stage the crime. Initially, the investigation was led to believe it. For a long time, the missing man was considered guilty. Irrefutable evidence. Detectives soon found a backpack full of evidence. It was located near the home of the defendant's parents and contained Sam's personal belongings, clothes, a mobile phone, and a wallet. After searching the criminal's residence and examining his computer's browser history, some intriguing facts emerged. Daniel's premeditation was evident from his Google searches: how to hide a body, and quick ways to end someone's life. They also found the weapons used in the crime and dismemberment. Ballistic tests later confirmed that the shots were fired from the recovered pistol. Sam's torso was so mutilated that it could only be identified by a tattoo on his chest that read "Mom and Dad" in a heart. The next day, investigators shared the shocking news with the Herr family. It was a devastating blow, especially since it was the eve of their son's birthday, making it feel like a cruel joke. Nobody could understand what their loved one had done to deserve such a monstrous death. Until the case was solved, the Kibuishi family was also bewildered about why their daughter was taken from them. She had often spoken of her college friend and admired him, and it was hard for everyone to believe that such a pleasant young man could commit such horrific acts. Eventually, the truth came to light. Samuel Herr was buried as a hero with military honors. His family, Julie's family, friends, acquaintances, and former colleagues attended the farewell ceremony. Other compassionate citizens of Costa Mesa also came to pay their respects. Arrests. Finally, justice was served. The real criminal was caught. In November 2012, Other individuals were arrested: his fiancée Rachel and his brother Tim. They were charged with being accomplices in hiding evidence and misleading the police. Detectives believed Daniel's girlfriend knew about his plans from the start, but she insisted otherwise, claiming she was unaware of the crimes. She stated she only fulfilled Dan's request to pass the backpack to Tim, who then hid it in a secret place. Allegedly, neither was interested in its contents or understood what was happening. Rachel was released on bail while awaiting her hearing. In February 2013, Buffett appeared on Dr. Phil, where she publicly declared she had been duped by her ex-fiancé. Verdict. In December 2015, nearly 5.5 years later, Daniel Wozniak went to trial. The prosecution viewed the defendant's actions as so heinous and cynical that they sought the death penalty. The prosecutor argued that greed was the motive behind Sam's death. While Julie's life was ended without reason, only to frame Herr, it was determined that the accused needed money to pay for a wedding and a luxurious honeymoon. He knew Rachel wanted a grand celebration and was willing to go to great lengths to fulfill her dream, even if it meant taking lives. No one could have imagined him capable of such things. He was considered a likable person, a talented actor, and a true life of the party. However, investigators revealed his darker side. It's worth noting Wozniak's defense. He secured one of the best attorneys. The lengthy pre-trial period was due to numerous motions and complaints against the detectives who conducted the investigation. The defense claimed they violated his rights by eavesdropping on his conversations and coercing him into confessing. Simultaneously, they insisted he was mentally unstable. Despite numerous examinations, experts found no significant psychological disorders. During the investigation, Daniel seemed to revel in his notoriety. He also appeared on a talk show where he discussed the challenges he faced throughout the ordeal. His face often broke into a smile that became his trademark over time. Over 20 witnesses were called by the prosecution during the trial, including Wesley Freilich, who testified against him. Initially, the young man was arrested, but was later released when detectives concluded he didn't know what had happened and was simply fulfilling his acquaintance's request. Daniel's brother Tim also spoke against him, explaining he had no idea about the violent events and was inadvertently caught up in the intrigue. The defense didn't present anyone to vouch for the actor. Even his family didn't attend the trial. It was evident that the accused did not see himself as guilty and showed no remorse. Daniel's attorney attempted to cast Rachel in a negative light, shifting the blame onto her, claiming she was materialistic and manipulative. He likely wanted more than one defendant to look bad. The jury took an hour to reach a verdict. The court found Daniel Wozniak guilty and sentenced him to death. The victims' families were satisfied with the decision. "I only regret that I can't carry out the sentence myself," admitted Sam Herr. Unfortunately, over time it became clear that the sentence would likely not be carried out. The governor of California announced a moratorium on the death penalty, effectively commuting the cold-blooded criminal's sentence to life imprisonment alongside 700 other inmates. This allowed him the opportunity to live on, unlike his victims. Tim Wozniak was found guilty of hiding evidence and, as part of a plea deal, received a 10-day sentence. In the fall of 2018, Rachel Buffett faced trial and was found guilty of providing false testimony, resulting in a 32-month prison sentence. As of now, the actress is free, and the wedding between the couple never took place. The history of crime worldwide includes numerous cases where money was the motive. However, this criminal story is shocking in its vileness and hopelessness. For his base desires, Wozniak deprived two wonderful people of their lives. Like a skilled puppeteer, he controlled their fates, and perhaps such people have a special place reserved in hell, or at least that's what the victims' families believe. The costs of the profession. Under the law, an investigation must be conducted fully, comprehensively, and objectively. However, as practice shows, crime investigations aren't always approached properly. Society often turns a blind eye to what's happening, justifying its indifference with absurd reasons like, it's his own fault. As a result, the victims' families are left alone with their grief and uncertainty. In the story to be discussed, everything was biased, from the search for a missing girl to the lengthy investigation and court proceedings. The criminal case was closed after 10 years. It was only thanks to the persistent efforts of the parents, a change of detective, and external intervention. Today, we will try to understand why the body of a young beauty was found in one of the livestock burial grounds, who was responsible for her death, and why such an attitude was formed towards the unfortunate victim. Disappearance. 19-year-old Kara Nichols disappeared on October 9, 2012, in the 6700 block of Colorado Springs, Colorado, USA. She was last seen wearing a hooded sweatshirt, dark-colored jeans, white DC sneakers, and pink headphones. The tall blonde with green eyes had 2 tattoos, a marijuana leaf on her right ankle and an astronaut on her left wrist. She also had numerous piercings on her back, ears, and above her lip. Flyers distributed around the city listed these and other distinctive features of her appearance. Information that the missing person was suffering from bipolar or borderline personality disorder was also provided. The first to suspect something was wrong was her older brother Terrence. Later, Julia and Paul Nichols, Kara's parents, joined the search operation. The family knew that despite her use of banned substances, she always made contact and reported on her whereabouts. However, when the girl did not call back on October 10th and 11, her relatives became worried. They were always concerned about her, but she wanted to live a free life and refused to comply. Recently, she had become more distant and communicated only with her brother. Modeling, her occupation, was not yielding the desired income. Therefore, when she was offered a substantial paycheck for a lingerie photo shoot, she gladly accepted. She informed her roommates about her upcoming plans and left late at night. The shoot was scheduled for early morning in Denver, making the trip more convenient. Moreover, she was not traveling alone, but was accompanied by colleagues in the business. The girls, having no driver's licenses or a car, fortunately found a suitable driver. Kara's story raised no doubts. Acquaintances had seen her work portfolios multiple times, and her social media accounts were filled with professional photographs. Everything would have been fine, except that Nichols did not return the next day, nor the day after. The last time Terrence spoke with his sister was at 11:45 p.m. on October 9th. However, their conversation was unexpectedly cut off, after which she did not call back. Then the brother thought that the connection was lost, so he calmly went to sleep, knowing that they would definitely talk in the morning. However, on October 10th, Kara ignored all attempts to contact her. Her voicemail was continuously active. The brother again assumed she was busy or resting after work, and he waited for the model to appear on her own. But even on October 11th, there was no news from her. The brother's worry increased. Such silence was not typical for his close relative. In connection with this, Terrence visited her home, where he talked to neighbors. None of them had seen the friend for several days. One young man reported seeing Kara get into a dark-colored sedan around 11 p.m. Unfortunately, he could not see who was driving. The darkness hindered him. However, he mentioned that it seemed she was not alone. After that, Terrence entered his sister's room and looked around. His attention was drawn to the girl's personal items, which she never went without. Among them were a cosmetics bag, purse, charger, and laptop. $300 in cash lay on the bedside table. Clearly, Kara had not planned a prolonged absence. Then the brother turned on her laptop. It became clear that she had not been online for more than 2 days. This was out of character for the aspiring model, who promptly kept up with job offers. Convinced that his concern was not in vain, Terrence decided to report to the police. At the station, he recounted everything in order. However, the law enforcement officers were not in a hurry with the search. The officers claimed that Kara was old enough. She was not obligated to report her whereabouts to everyone. The police suggested that the girl might have been delayed at the shoot or went somewhere else. Maybe she had a boyfriend that no one knew about, and she was spending time with him. Nevertheless, the police's arguments did not satisfy the applicant. He knew his sister well. No matter what happened, she would have definitely made contact by now. Terrence insisted that something bad had happened to her. Nevertheless, The police did not take the boy's words seriously and advised him to come back later. The life of Kara Nichols. Kara Nichols was born on May 20th, 1993, and was the middle child in her family. She spent her childhood with her older brother and younger sister, growing up sociable and friendly, often surrounded by her family. Kara excelled in school and had a keen interest in art, particularly painting. As a talented child, she won several art competitions and was predicted to have a promising future. Yet she was sensitive, deeply feeling the pain of others as her own. During her teenage years, her behavior shifted. Kara became introverted, and her academic performance declined. At 13, she was arrested for shoplifting, which resulted in a sentence of community service. Her parents were baffled by the sudden change, as they had always been attentive and loving. She had never wanted for anything, so her theft was likely a form of rebellion against established norms. At 16, Kara's mental health began to falter following the loss of her beloved dog, which plunged her into a deep depression. Her parents sent her to a psychologist, but the sessions proved ineffective, and her condition worsened. Eventually, she was admitted to a psychiatric hospital where she was diagnosed with a personality disorder. After a brief treatment, she showed improvement with the help of prescribed medications. However, due to severe side effects, Kara gradually stopped taking them and worsened her unstable mental state by using banned substances, believing them to be a better alternative to antipsychotics. Behavioral issues led her to attend several alternative schools until she finally graduated. After high school, Kara worked as a waitress and pursued her childhood dream of becoming a model. Her appearance was promising, and she sincerely believed she could succeed in the field. She diligently searched for modeling agencies and worked on her portfolio. During this time, her health noticeably improved, and she even quit her harmful addiction. However, as time passed, she realized that beauty alone was insufficient for a successful modeling career. Luck and extensive connections were necessary. In the summer of 2012, the Nichols family moved to Chicago, Illinois. However, the new city did not welcome Kara, and her depression returned. Stress led her to resume her harmful habit, despite her parents' support and attempts to help by enrolling her in a drug rehabilitation program, which she was soon expelled from for refusing to follow the rules. The Nichols were at a loss on how to guide her, and were deeply concerned about where she was getting the money for her addiction, since her small waitress salary was clearly insufficient. After discontinuing her treatment, Kara's parents became disillusioned. Her psychological state fluctuated daily. After brief discussions, she decided to return to her hometown, believing that familiar surroundings and social circles would help restore her to life. Her family disliked the idea but could not persuade her to stay. Eventually, Kara returned to Colorado Springs. Terrence promised to look after her, and their open and warm relationship somewhat reassured the parents. However, Kara wanted independence and did not stay with her brother, only visiting him occasionally. She rented an apartment with other male tenants, shocking her parents when they learned she was living under the same roof with 3 men. They demanded she find other housing, but she refused, explaining that she had no better options and had found the men to be harmless. Gradually, everything went back to normal. Kara returned to her previous job and continued modeling work by creating a profile on Model Mayhem. Over time, she received more offers, but they did not lead to the expected results. Breaking into the desired world among thousands of profiles was challenging. Later, Kara faced problems. She fell behind on rent and even borrowed food from her roommates. She discussed these issues with her brother, who also supported her financially. Thus, she was determined not to miss the opportunity presented to her on October 9th. However, no one expected that night to be her last. Investigation. After being turned away at the police station, Terrence reached out to his parents. The eldest son recounted what had happened and asked for help, knowing that in such cases, collective pressure was necessary. As soon as the family learned of their daughter's disappearance, they immediately flew to Colorado Springs. Kara's cell phone was still turned off, and it was also discovered that she had not shown up for the job she valued so much, confirming their worst fears. Convinced, the Nichols family as a whole went to the police. Law enforcement was compelled to respond to their report. Eventually, the El Paso County Sheriff's Office acknowledged that the circumstances of her disappearance raised questions. Detectives reached out to local residents asking for any information about the girl's whereabouts. At the same time, the parents allowed investigators access to her cell phone data. Experts confirmed that the last message Kara sent was to her brother. Based on cellular provider data, it was known that on October 9th, her mobile device was indeed headed north, but was then turned off. Friends and acquaintances also joined the search efforts, distributing flyers throughout Colorado Springs and Denver. After talking with her close contacts, investigators examined other means of communication used by the girl, particularly her laptop. Thus, early in the investigation, a secret the girl had closely guarded from her family was revealed. Some of her modeling work, posted on websites, served as a cover for the escort services she had been involved in since she was 17. This was how Paul and Julia learned the true source of Kara's livelihood. However, there was not enough time to recover from the shock. Consent was needed to disclose this information to get new leads. At the same time, this circumstance could significantly affect the investigation and decrease public interest. Unfortunately, there are many examples where the perception of the victim was notably distorted in such cases. The Nichols didn't want to air their dirty laundry, but were forced to do so in the hope of an exception. However, no miracle occurred. After the new details were published, news agencies began canceling interviews with Kara's family one by one. Coverage of the disappearance waned. The search for the girl hit a dead end. The only organization that took up helping with the investigation was the National Women's Coalition Against Violence and Exploitation. They ensured that the community and authorities did not forget about the missing model. Search for witnesses. In November 2012, detectives announced their intention to speak with two women who were believed to have been in the car with Kara on the fateful night. Some even described their appearance. They possibly belonged to the same line of work as the missing girl. Undoubtedly, the witnesses were of interest to the investigation, but were not considered suspects. Most likely, these women were the last to see her alive. A composite sketch of one of them was made publicly available. However, hopes that someone would come forward proved vain. Later, even the testimony of their existence was doubted. The investigation stalled again. That month, Kara's photos appeared on an escort service website in Las Vegas. However, detectives found that the girl had not been involved in the posting. Someone had decided to capitalize on her popularity. Subsequently, the Nichols profile was removed. Concerned citizens periodically approached the police station. However, after verification, their reports turned out to be false. In the spring of 2013, a businessman from Colorado Springs claimed to have seen the sought-after woman from the end of October through December 2012. She was with a tall, unkempt man. The woman appeared frightened, as if she was being forcibly held and made to do something. One day, her companion pushed her, which did not escape the notice of a bystander. He threatened the man and asked him to leave the lady alone. The eyewitness's statement was verified. The police managed to find the man described, but detectives confirmed that the woman with him was his former girlfriend. In the autumn of the same year, a criminal law student decided to investigate Kara's case independently. He traveled to Denver and spoke with many homeless people and substance users. Some of them reported seeing the missing woman at a non-profit organization dealing with the exchange of syringes and needles for those using banned substances. However, it later turned out that the lead was false, and so it was with every testimony. Many had already given up hope of finding the story's heroine alive. Too much time had passed for this type of case. In the summer of 2013, the girl's parents announced a reward for any information regarding their daughter's whereabouts. But it all seemed futile. Kidnapping for ransom was ruled out as no demands had been made over the months. A new development. The following year brought a sensational breakthrough that spurred movement in the investigation. In May 2014, Deputy Sheriff Cliff Porter admitted to having cut corners in the investigation. Unexpectedly, He disclosed that he had not given enough attention to Kara Nichols's case and, most importantly, had overlooked substantial evidence that could have played a critical role in the early stages of the investigation. This confession shocked the Nichols family, as they felt the investigation into their daughter's disappearance had been treated carelessly due to her line of work. The inadequate handling of cell phone records called into question the entire office's conduct. The authorities' inaction did not go unnoticed. Numerous audits brought discipline to the department, and those responsible were removed from their positions. In May 2016, former Sheriff Terry Makita and members of his staff were charged with corruption, fabricating witness testimony, kidnapping, and extortion. This convinced the victim's family that their relative's case had never been appropriately handled. Nevertheless, this event provided a new impetus for the investigation. Thanks to a change in detectives in February 2022, the missing woman's body was discovered. She was found buried in a grave alongside a horse's corpse on a farm near Colorado Springs. But let's go through the details in order. The suspect. On February 1st, 2022, a woman named Christina Hollendorfer walked into the police station. Detectives had tried to speak with her several times before, but she had refused to cooperate. Since 2014, the witness had been unwilling to testify against her former husband, Joel. However, years later, she broke her silence and accused her ex of murdering Kara Nichols. An examination of the missing girl's calls and messages revealed that she had received 8 calls between 9:58 and 11:08 p.m. on October 9th, most of which were from a man named Joel Hollendorfer. Detectives had interrogated him several times, but beyond general information, they discovered little. He admitted to having hired the woman's services and had planned to meet her from the evening of October 9th to the morning of October 10th. However, the meeting never occurred. The escort did not make it to him. His statement raised suspicions, especially since the geolocation data from Kara's mobile device indicated that on the night of her disappearance, she was near the suspect's parents' house. On October 15, 2014, a search was conducted at the man's and his family's home. At the time of the search, detectives spoke with Joel and his mother, Betty. They noted their calm and friendly demeanor. It did not appear that they were hiding anything. They kindly showed the entire property, including several fresh burial sites for deceased animals. It should be noted that the Hollendorfer family had owned the farm since 1985 and had a large livestock yard. Dogs trained to find human remains searched the area. They reacted to some of the livestock graves a few times. However, further examination of their contents revealed nothing suspicious. It was possible that the dogs confused the scent of dead animals with that of a human. To definitively rule out Joel's involvement in the crime, samples from some suspicious areas were collected for analysis. However, the tests showed that the samples were unrelated to the case. Nonetheless, suspicions about the man were not lifted. It turned out that Hollendorfer had a history of harassment and violating restraining orders. He was a hardened criminal who had repeatedly violated the terms of his parole. Moreover, he had used banned substances, which had contributed to the breakdown of his family. The investigation had approached his ex-wife at least twice. During conversations, it was established that Christina and Joel were raising 2 children. Initially, the woman was reluctant to share details of their life together and later refused to communicate altogether. Thus, along with other theories regarding Kara's disappearance, Joel remained the only suspect. Finally, after 8 years, his identity was exposed. Mrs. Hollendorfer claimed that in November 2014, her ex-husband confessed to her that he had accidentally ended the life of a hired escort and buried her body in an old horse grave. She learned about this after the death of her father-in-law. When the funeral was over, her former husband revealed that he felt guilty about his father's death. According to her, he confessed to his parents what he had done. Learning the terrible news, the elder Hollendorfer fell into a deep depression, became seriously ill, and soon died. All this time, his family had been covering for the criminal. This explained the incredible hospitality and cooperation that Betty and Joel displayed during the farm search. Everything was done to avoid raising further suspicion. On February 3, 2022, Another search was conducted at the suspect's home and property. This time, the farm was thoroughly dug up. Subsequently, human remains were found in a pit 2 meters deep. 4 days later, the 47-year-old man was arrested. Later analysis confirmed that the found corpse belonged to the sought-after Kara Nichols. Essentially, only her bones remained. However, thanks to modern technology, the girl was successfully identified: the defendant. During interrogation, the man didn't break down immediately. Eventually, however, he confessed that he had not intended to end the girl's life. He had indeed found her on an intimacy services website. On October 9th, he called her and arranged a meeting, after which he picked her up from her home. Intimacy occurred in his old car. Everything was fine until, in a moment of passion, the man began to strangle his companion. Once Joel realized that Kara had lost consciousness, he stopped. Initially, he tried to administer first aid, but it was too late. Kara was already deceased. Frightened, the criminal drove her to his family farm and buried her in the first grave he found. He moved the body several times and eventually buried it where his mother's favorite horse was interred. This explained why the search dogs were confused by the scents. Moreover, during the initial search, this particular area had not been inspected. Soon, Joel Hollendorfer was charged with first-degree murder and tampering with evidence. Meanwhile, Betty denied any knowledge of the crime committed by her son, asserting that she had always cooperated with the investigation and genuinely believed in his innocence. Justice. The hearings took place in the summer of 2023. The prosecution insisted that the defendant had intentionally committed the crime, thus realizing his sinister fantasies. At the same time, forensic experts could not provide detailed information about the victim's death. However, based on the fact that Kara's hyoid bone was broken, asphyxiation was named as the cause of death. Experts claimed that one cannot accidentally strangle someone to death. There is always time to reconsider and stop. Another factor considered was the victim's state under the influence of banned substances. Hollendorfer's defense argued that Nichols's death was due to asphyxiation from which she could not recover. Under similar circumstances, the likelihood of recovery for a healthy person is significantly higher than for a substance-dependent individual. As depicted during the trial, an entrenched addict, which the victim was portrayed to be, would have no chance of survival. This was explained by the long-term effects of banned substances on the human body. Unfortunately, it was impossible to confirm or refute the lawyer's statements over time. The Nichols family was extremely upset by how their daughter was portrayed. Kara's father noted that this judgment negated any sympathy from the jurors and depicted her as an unworthy victim. Nonetheless, during the trial, Joel did not appear remorseful. Some observed that he even smiled at times. Ultimately, the defendant's actions were reclassified to second-degree murder. He was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 24 years in prison. The sentence did not satisfy the victim's family, who had hoped for a life sentence for the perpetrator. Moreover, due to insufficient evidence, no one else was punished. Julia and Paul Nichols called the process a complete miscarriage of justice. The bereaved parents hope that despite the numerous labels attached to their daughter, Kara's friends and acquaintances will remember her positively, not just as sensational news. She was a teenager who battled with mental health issues but was cruelly dehumanized, concluded the girl's mother about the investigation and trial process. Do you think justice was fully served in the case of Kara Nichols's disappearance and death? A psychological exhumation changed the outcome of the investigation 4 years later. A psychological profile is called a detailed examination and analysis of a person's personality, their character traits, behavioral peculiarities, emotional state, intellect, self-esteem, and the motivations behind their actions. To compile such a profile, experts typically resort to methods such as interviews, various psychological tests, observations, situational modeling, and even analysis of social media pages. But what if the person has long passed away and you need to create their psychological profile and assess their emotional state shortly before death? The case of Kristen Trickle is quite complex and, one might say, unique in its kind. It is referred to as the first instance of psychological exhumation in forensic history, conducted to uncover the motivations and thought processes of a young woman who suddenly decided to settle accounts with life. No one believed that the joyful, devout Kristen, who had big plans for the future, would suddenly end everything without any apparent reason. The forensic pathologist's conclusion supported the main theory, but an experienced psychologist managed to uncover the truth. The main problem was the time that had passed since the tragedy. Years had gone by, but eventually, this did not prevent the conviction of the criminal, who was sure he had gotten away with it. The love story of Kristen and Colby Trickle. Kristen Trickle, née Reese, was born on August 14, 1993, in a small town in southeastern Nebraska. Her childhood can hardly be described as carefree and untroubled. Her biological mother left the family when the little girl was not even 3 years old. The woman abandoned her husband and child for another man, moved to California, and never again showed interest in her daughter's fate. Kristen's father, James, raised his daughter on his own, doing everything possible to ensure she lacked for nothing. However, the man suffered from a severe illness that progressively worsened, and when Kristen turned 16, her father passed away. Since there were no other close relatives, she could have been sent to a shelter until she came of age. At this time, an aunt and uncle on her father's side, who lived in the neighboring state of Kansas, stepped in. Although the couple was raising 3 children of their own, they expressed a willingness to take in their orphaned niece and do everything possible to ensure her comfortable and happy life. Soon, the young girl moved into her relative's home. In her new family, Kristen never felt like an outsider. On the contrary, her aunt and uncle treated her just as they did their own children, surrounding her with love and care. Kristen herself did well in school, attended art studio classes, helped her family with household tasks, and dreamed of becoming a veterinary doctor because she loved animals dearly. Relatives and friends described her as responsive, kind, friendly, and very sweet. She never despaired, confidently pursued her goals, and energized everyone around her with her optimism. The Rice family was religious, so they regularly attended church on Sundays, where 18-year-old Kristen met a young man named Colby. He was an aspiring musician, performing as part of a band that played music during sermons and services. He had also recently turned 18, was quite talented, and dreamed of building a successful music career in the future. The young people quickly formed a friendship, which soon turned into a romantic relationship. Colby was skilled on the guitar and wrote his own songs, which he dedicated to his beloved, capturing her heart. He was open, sociable, cheerful, easily made friends, and could easily be the life of any party. After finishing high school, the young man took a serious interest in military affairs and joined the Army. By the age of 18, he had signed several contracts and commenced his service in the U.S. Armed Forces. Over the next 3 years, he managed to build a decent military career. Meanwhile, he stayed in touch with Kristen, with whom he frequently called and corresponded. At the age of 21, Colby unexpectedly entered the reserves, returned home, and proposed to his sweetheart, who happily accepted. The couple married in April 2014. The newlyweds settled in a small town called Hays, in Kansas, where Colby finished college and pursued a music career, albeit not very successfully. He performed at small parties and local events, playing cover versions of well-known hits. The couple had 2 dogs, which they adored, and many considered their marriage quite happy. However, 5 years into their marriage, a terrible tragedy occurred. A grim Halloween Eve. On October 31, 2019, around 4 in the morning, a distressed call was made to the emergency services dispatch. The caller, a man who identified himself as Colby Trickle, reported that his wife, Kristen, had fired a bullet into her head from a revolver kept in their home. A medical team was promptly dispatched to the scene, along with a police patrol car that was nearby at the time. At the front door, they were met by a young man who allowed the officers inside but stayed outside himself. Trickle appeared relatively calm, given the severity of the situation. When the officers entered the bedroom, they found a woman lying on the bed in a pool of her own blood. A large revolver lay on her abdomen, and a gunshot wound was evident on her chin. It seemed she had already passed away, but unexpectedly, the victim moved her hand, and an officer found a weak pulse and breathing. Following this, Kristen was moved to the adjacent room to properly position her on the floor for resuscitation efforts. Unfortunately, despite all efforts, she had passed away by the time the ambulance arrived, and the medical team could only confirm her death. Sergeant Brandon Hautman went outside and informed Colby that his spouse had passed away. The young man asked repeatedly if the officer was sure about this, and upon receiving confirmation, he began to cry. His behavior and tears seemed insincere, as just minutes before Hautman's arrival, he had been casually talking with other patrollers about video games. At first glance, it appeared that the woman had indeed decided to end her life voluntarily, but upon examining the scene, experienced detectives immediately suspected foul play. It was Halloween Eve, and it seemed the deceased had been actively preparing for the celebration. On her bedroom's vanity lay handmade costume decorations she had prepared, and in the kitchen, themed treats for children were set out in bowls, including lollipop bats and ghosts, gummy worms, and more, an uncharacteristic way out. The chosen method of ending her life was very strange and untypical for a woman, as was the scene itself. First, the deceased was found nearly undressed, wearing only her underwear. Women generally want to look beautiful even in death, concerned about how they will be found. Secondly, a gunshot to the head is not a typically feminine method, again, due to concerns about disfiguring themselves. Kristen's face was so badly damaged that she had to be buried in a closed casket. The third and most significant oddity was the weapon itself. The revolver was too large and cumbersome for such a petite and fragile woman. It would have been uncomfortable for her to hold, and she could hardly have twisted her arm to shoot herself in the chin. Moreover, the position of the weapon puzzled the officer as it lay on the woman's stomach, pointing sideways. However, the deceased's spouse explained that after realizing what had happened, he too had thought about ending his life, had held the revolver to his temple, but then abandoned the thought and decided to call emergency services in hopes of saving his beloved. While law enforcement continued their work at the scene, the woman's mobile phone lying on a nightstand unexpectedly rang with an alarm. It turned out the deceased had plans for the morning and had set the alarm not to be late, but she seemingly changed her mind during the night and decided to end her life. This looked highly suspicious, and detectives suspected they were dealing with a masterful staging. The widower, now the main suspect, was due for questioning, interrogation, and Colby's account. The man willingly agreed to go to the police station to give his statement. He appeared upset, but not devastated, behaving calmly and confidently. He explained that on that evening, his wife, Kristen, returned from her job at Walmart, where she was a manager expecting a promotion to senior manager. They had dinner together, played video games, and then Colby went to bed early because he was feeling unwell, while Kristen went to the kitchen to finish cleaning and setting out sweets for the holiday. In the middle of the night, Colby was awakened by a sudden, loud bang. For a few seconds, he was disoriented, his ears ringing, and he could see nothing in the darkness. Once he turned on the light, he found his wife lying motionless beside him, blood pouring from her head. He tried to revive her, but realizing it was futile, he grabbed the revolver, held it to his own head, but then set it back on her body, called emergency services, and went outside to meet the police. The sequence and nature of his actions raised many questions. For instance, why he placed the weapon on the woman's abdomen instead of throwing it on the floor, the bed, or leaving it on a nightstand. It was also unclear why he waited outside for the police and medics if he thought his wife might still be saved. Typically, in such situations, people attempt to perform life-saving measures or simply press something against the wound to stop the bleeding. The former serviceman did not approach his wife again, explaining that he was in shock. While a police officer was trying to provide first aid before the medics arrived, Colby did not come over or inquire about the situation. Instead, he casually talked outside with a patrol officer about music and video games. Upon learning that Kristen was no longer alive, he squeezed out a few tears but quickly regained his composure. At the station, Colby was asked the standard question about whether there was any life insurance on the deceased, to which he responded negatively, but added that he was entitled to some minor payouts from the armed forces where he had served. Incidentally, Trickle began boasting about his accomplishments, noting that he had served in intelligence and was involved in special operations around the world. His words sounded convincing, though it soon turned out that almost none of what he said was true. When asked why, in his opinion, his wife might have taken such a desperate step, he replied that she had suffered from prolonged depressions from an early age, which developed against the backdrop of all the events that happened to her in childhood and adolescence. He mentioned her mother's betrayal, her father's death, and her forced life in her uncle and aunt's home, whom Kristen did not even know before. The widower's words again sounded convincing, and he spoke confidently and calmly. Nonetheless, experienced investigators felt that this man was lying and possibly had premeditated what to say. However, at that moment, they had nothing to charge him with, as there were no concrete pieces of evidence against him, so Mr. Trickle had to be released. Kristen's family's perspective. When Kristen's uncle, aunt, and her siblings were informed of the tragedy, they immediately traveled to Hayes, nearly 500 miles from their city, to speak with the police and prepare for the funeral. Unanimously, they vehemently denied the possibility that she could have willingly ended her life, citing her deep religious faith, regular church attendance, and her belief that such an act was a sin. Additionally, according to her family, Kristen was a life-loving optimist with ambitious future plans. Specifically, she wanted to open a shelter for homeless animals and had even scoped out an available property with a large plot of land she intended to lease long-term for this purpose. These statements were soon verified, and detectives confirmed that she had been negotiating to rent the property. Moreover, she was anticipating a promotion at work, a position she was very proud of, was preparing her costume and candies for Halloween, and had promised to visit her sister for her birthday in mid-November. Her relatives also insisted that she had never suffered from depression, had no mental disorders or harmful habits. Another crucial point, they stressed, was that she would never recklessly abandon her beloved dogs. During discussions with the police, the uncle and aunt suggested that Colby might have coldly dealt with his wife, orchestrating it to appear as though she had voluntarily left this world. They described her husband as a cruel and domineering man who tried to control every aspect of her interactions, chose whom she could communicate with, and would fly into a rage if Kristen did not respond to his calls or messages immediately. He also forbade her from talking to her relatives, and she would call them secretly from her husband. Visits were rare. During her last visit, she confided that she could no longer tolerate such treatment, had talked with her husband about it, and if things did not change, they would have to separate. Autopsy results and forensic expert conclusions. Following conversations with both the widower and the deceased's relatives, detectives believed that the forensic examination would be decisive in the case. The examination revealed only one entry wound from a bullet, located on the chin. The shot had been fired while the woman was lying on her back, with the gun barrel pressed closely to her head. It was possible that she could have inflicted the wound herself, although it would have been extremely awkward for her to do so. There were no signs of struggle or resistance on Kristen's body. However, upon learning from relatives that Colby was a true tyrant with controlling behavior, the detectives insisted on an additional examination for any signs of bruises, abrasions, scratches, or other injuries in various stages of healing. They hypothesized that if the former serviceman had occasionally been violent towards his wife, there would inevitably be some traces. Yet the investigation was met with disappointment as no internal or external injuries were found, other than the gunshot wound. Pathological liar and a flawed family. The investigation continued to scrutinize Colby, examining his personality, and it was revealed that he was a pathological liar. He lied so frequently and convincingly that it seemed he began to believe his own fabrications. It started with the fact that he had never been in any hot spots, nor had any involvement with intelligence, despite having convinced everyone during the interrogation that he was telling the truth. The man lied to those around him about having a successful music career and high earnings. In reality, for the past several years, Kristen, who worked tirelessly, had been the main breadwinner for their family. Colby, on the other hand, scraped by with occasional gigs during holidays, spending the rest of his time playing video games. Despite his real talent, he lacked persistence, patience, and was hindered by his laziness. Furthermore, the police had a warrant to seize and examine gadgets owned by the couple, and this inspection yielded quite intriguing results. The deceased's phone calendar was packed with scheduled activities ranging from haircuts to meetings with a real estate agent. Meanwhile, Colby's messages revealed that he had been openly flirting with another woman, even exchanging messages while at the police station. On a laptop in the living room, a search history that had been deleted was recovered, showing that shortly before the tragedy, there were queries about the payout amount for a life insurance policy in the event of death. This last aspect particularly interested the authorities. Checks revealed that Colby had lied again. 2 insurance policies had been taken out on his wife, with him as the beneficiary in the event of her death. These included military spouse insurance, as well as a standard life insurance policy. The amounts involved were far from trivial, contrary to what the man had claimed. He had even calculated exactly what payouts he would be entitled to, the fortunate widower. Despite numerous inconsistencies in the case, direct allegations from the deceased's relatives against Colby, and the existence of a clear motive for him, the decision ultimately hinged on the forensic expert's report. The document stated that there were no signs of violence on the body except for a single gunshot wound, suggesting that it was highly likely that the deceased had voluntarily ended her life. The case was closed and archived. By that time, the widower had already received the payouts due to him. From a special insurance for U.S. Armed Forces spouses, he received nearly $50,000, and from the life insurance policy, over $100,000. On the very day the money was deposited into his account, he ordered a life-sized realistic doll for intimate pleasures from an online store. He also purchased a new gaming console, an electric guitar, and expensive musical equipment, and began spending the rest on clothes and entertainment, nearly every evening in bars and restaurants. Colby was enjoying life, sparing no expense for himself, and genuinely believed that the story was over, with no evidence against him and thus no potential charges. He lived happily for about 2 years until a pivotal event occurred: a new prosecutor and the suspect's arrest. In the summer of 2021, a new district prosecutor was appointed, to whom the detectives handling the Trickle case appealed for help. They requested permission to reopen the investigation, asserting they had little doubt that the widower had eliminated his wife, making it appear as though she had voluntarily departed from life. As proof, they presented all the peculiarities and discrepancies, pointed to the restored browser history, and highlighted the suspect's very unusual behavior and his clear motive. After reviewing the case materials, the prosecutor authorized the reopening of the case, and in July 2021, Trickle was finally taken into custody. He was charged with first-degree premeditated homicide and intentionally misleading the investigation. During his arrest, he remained calm and immediately contacted his lawyers, who began working on his defense right away. Colby's defense relied on the forensic pathologist's findings and argued that Kristen had suffered from chronic depression for many years, and her tragic departure was only a matter of time. Meanwhile, his lawyers tried to portray their client as a loving and caring husband, a valorous serviceman, and a devout person. Psychological autopsy. The investigation could have hit a dead end, as it relied heavily on the same medical conclusion. Thus, the prosecution took an unprecedented step by bringing in experienced specialists to create a psychological profile of the deceased and analyze her emotional state just before the tragedy. This unusual method was termed a psychological autopsy or psychological exhumation. The psychiatrist conducted extensive work, analyzing data from Kristen's mobile phone, her social media posts, her most recent photos, and also by interviewing her relatives, friends, and colleagues. Gathering and analyzing the information took months, but the expert's conclusion was clear. Kristen could not have intended to end her life, given her short-term and long-term plans. Trial and verdict. The legal proceedings in this complex case began only in September 2023, nearly 4 years after the tragedy. The defendant had a clear motive, behaved suspiciously, and consistently lied during interrogations, but the forensic expert's conclusion initially worked in his favor. However, the prosecution now had another report that could potentially turn the case around. When Colby was questioned about the insurance inquiries on his computer, he claimed they were probably made by his wife wanting to know the payout amount. However, the date and time of the request completely contradicted his words, as the girl was confirmed to be at work at that time, verified by surveillance footage from the store. Asked about the life-sized doll for intimate pleasures that he purchased even before his late wife was buried, and other expenses, he responded that he couldn't sleep alone and needed someone to hold, and that he bought the console, guitar, etc., as a way to distract himself from grief. His mother corroborated his statements, fiercely defending her son throughout the trial. The psychiatrist's conclusion about the victim's emotional state was pivotal. This meticulous work took time, but its results left no doubt that Kristen had not planned to end her life. Additionally, a curious detail emerged from the autopsy report regarding the bullet's trajectory angle. In the courtroom, the jury was shown the weapon used and the angle at which the bullet entered the girl's chin. Kristen was right-handed, but the nature of the wound suggested that either she shot with her left hand or someone positioned to her left had placed the gun to the head of the sleeping girl and fired. On November 20th, 2023, the jury unanimously found Colby guilty on all counts, sentencing him to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole no earlier than 50 years. The defendant never admitted his guilt, and all his appeals were rejected. Most curious and strange in this case, however, is that corrections regarding the cause of death were never made to the medical report. On an early August morning in 2015, emergency services received a call. Tom Martins, the caller, urgently reported a violent altercation involving his daughter and son-in-law. "He's bloodied and I fear I might have killed him," Tom revealed with a shaken voice. In response, the dispatcher quickly mobilized medical support. The phone was then passed to Tom's distraught daughter, skilled in CPR. The dispatcher calmly instructed, "Stay composed. Rely on your training, not emotions. We need to revive your husband. Ready to start CPR?" Meanwhile, first responders rushed to the upscale neighborhood in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. They arrived at a $350,000 home, noted for its stylish gray shutters and well-maintained lawns, only to find Jason Corbett brutally murdered. This incident unfolds a tragic narrative of a widower with 2 young children, who was in dire need of emotional support after losing his cherished wife. It also introduces a young woman, seeming like a beacon of hope, who stepped in to care for the children. Yet, it serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of hastily integrating almost strangers into close-knit family bonds. If Jason had been fully aware of Molly's mental health background and had known her more intimately, he might have reconsidered her close involvement with his kids. For Molly, meeting Jason symbolized a fresh start, complete with a loving family and the children she always dreamt of. However, for Jason, this relationship tragically became a one-way journey with no return. Molly Martin's life was the epitome of the American dream. Born into a wealthy and educated white family, she enjoyed a prosperous upbringing in Farragut, Tennessee. Her early years were spent in a luxurious mansion where she was the cherished little princess. Neighbors recalled her as a reserved, somewhat introverted girl who was an adept swimmer despite frequent health-related absences from school.
With the family's move to the more lavish Fox Run area, Molly continued her education at Farragut High School, participating in the swim team. Though not as skilled as her peers, Molly still felt like a champion in her own world. Molly's mother, Sharon, a math doctorate from the prestigious Emory University in Georgia, and her father, Tom, an FBI agent and seasoned lawyer, instilled a family motto: success is measured only by achievements, regardless of whether they were real or perceived. The Martenses were known as pillars of society, a family striving for prestige, wealth, and perfect heirs, ready to continue their lifestyle. From a young age, the children were raised with a win-at-all-costs mentality. The main issue was that Molly, the beloved daughter and little princess, didn't live up to these high expectations, unlike her two brothers. To maintain their societal facade, Tom and Sharon went to great lengths to conceal why. Molly was perceived as frequently ill, with a supposed issue in her left foot causing her pain and requiring numerous hospitalizations and surgeries. In reality, it wasn't a physical ailment that kept Molly from school, but her mental health. To preserve their external image, Tom and Sharon kept their daughter's issues within the family, with few knowing what happened behind the closed doors of their luxurious mansion. Thanks to her parents' influence, Molly seemingly secured a spot at Clemson, one of America's top colleges. In 2003, her photograph appeared in the Clemson University yearbook as a freshman, but then records of her disappeared. In 2004, Molly began working at the Visage Beauty Salon in Knoxville, where she met stylist Jeremy Taylor. The two started dating and spent a year and a half together. Despite their closeness, Taylor only knew about Molly's leg health issues, necessitating numerous surgeries and often preventing her from working. Yet, he admired her dancing and ballet talents, never questioning the intense strain on her foot. After breaking up with Taylor, Molly joined a dating site where she started a romantic correspondence with Keith McGinn. On February 22, 2007, nearly a year before meeting the widowed father of two, Keith and Molly went on their first date. It was to Keith that Molly first revealed her bipolar disorder and some other accompanying issues. Keith, who suffered from chronic fatigue and depression himself, supported her and moved in with her a month later. Molly found work as a mammy, attended therapy, and things seemed to be going well. The fairy tale ended when she contracted a severe staph infection. The medication for the infection interfered with her bipolar medication, leading to a drastic change in her behavior. According to Keith, at one point, Molly was taking 16 pills prescribed by her psychiatrist daily, plus an additional 10 as needed. Most of these were for her bipolar disorder and manic depressive psychosis. Molly stopped sleeping, and their relationship rapidly deteriorated. In a bid to save their relationship, Molly decided to get pregnant. She always said that children would make her happy, Keith later revealed in an interview. Eventually, she got pregnant. I was terrified because I knew how many medications she was on. I was really scared. On September 16, 2007, Molly miscarried early in the pregnancy. Keith recalled, "She was devastated. But honestly, I was relieved. I thought it was for the best." 5 months later, in February 2008, with no improvement in her condition, Molly was admitted to a psychiatric unit in a medical rehabilitation center in Atlanta, Georgia. Her parents paid for the treatment. A few days after her discharge, she told Keith, "I want to go work as a nanny somewhere in Europe." He took it as a sign of her relapsing and didn't think much of her online advertisement seeking a nanny position. However, she soon informed him that she had found a job in Ireland and would be leaving for a while. Her advertisement was answered by Jason Corbett, unaware of the future nanny's troubles. Jason Corbett was born on February 12, 1976, in Limerick, Ireland. He grew up in a happy and caring family. His parents, John and Rita, raised 8 children, including Jason's twin brother, Wayne. The family valued emotional richness over material wealth, and despite financial struggles after their father lost his job, they strived to provide a nurturing environment for the children. To help out, Jason took a part-time job as a security guard at a school sports center. He was eager to earn money to delight his loved ones. Work ethic and the desire to support those around him were always important values for Jason, making him a favorite among family and friends. Margaret Fitzpatrick, or simply Meg, was one of those who had a deep affection for Jason. Right after meeting, they knew they were meant for each other. Married, they eagerly started planning a family, both desiring a large, happy household. In September 2004, they welcomed their first child, Jack, and 2 years later, their daughter Sarah was born. Meg and Jason felt true happiness raising their little ones, deeply loving each other and their children, and everything in their life seemed perfect. However, this idyllic life came to an abrupt end. On November 21st, 2006, just 3 months after Sarah's birth, tragedy struck. Meg woke up with an asthma attack and, despite medical intervention, passed away in the hospital. Her death left 30-year-old Jason in profound grief. In his loneliness and sorrow, only his love for his children kept him afloat. His relatives supported him, understanding the importance of being there for him during this difficult time. Humble and kind, Jason felt uneasy about relying so much on his family for help and childcare. This thought troubled Jason. He didn't want to be a burden, although his family never saw him that way. In 2007, he decided to hire a housekeeper. The first candidate, a Czech woman, didn't click with Jason, so he let her go. Then he hired a Spanish woman, but the language barrier posed problems. Both women were looking for temporary work, not willing to stay in Ireland long-term, which frustrated Jason, who sought a reliable long-term helper. He eventually concluded that the best solution would be to find an English-speaking nanny seeking long-term employment. In early February 2008, he emailed 20-year-old Molly Martins. She sent a resume that, as it would later emerge, contained inaccuracies. Molly claimed she had graduated from Clemson University, although she had actually dropped out. She also stated she had been approved as a foster parent, which was not true. She made no mention of her recent psychiatric hospitalization or her mental health issues. Jason thought he had finally found the nanny he was looking for. The prospective housekeeper agreed to move to Ireland and care for the children. She was living in Knoxville, Tennessee, and flew to Ireland on March 10, 2008. The plan hit a snag right away. At customs, Molly faced difficulties due to her one-way ticket, raising issues with immigration services. She couldn't explain how long she would stay in the country and didn't have a work visa. However, she managed to resolve these issues and was allowed entry. After living in Ireland for 2 weeks, the cheerful American called Keith and informed him that she wouldn't be returning. They broke up over the phone. The children, Sarah and Jack, quickly grew fond of their new nanny and loved her. Jason was happy to see life stabilizing. Molly took good care of the children, giving Jason peace of mind. Over time, their relationship grew closer, and Jason started inviting the nanny out on dates. Jason and Molly, who began their relationship under unusual circumstances, faced challenges. The initial honeymoon phase quickly gave way to reality. However, Jason, recognizing the situation's imperfections, reassured himself with Molly's skillful interaction with his children. The couple got engaged in 2010. Jason loved his new partner, and importantly, he believed his children had also grown to love the caring Molly. After their engagement, Molly suggested moving to America, longing for her homeland. Understanding that the children would miss Molly, Jason agreed. A year later, he transferred to a factory in Lexington, North Carolina, and sold his house in Ireland. That same year, they married in a grand ceremony in Molly's hometown of Knoxville, Tennessee. Molly's father, Tom Martins, walked her down the aisle, while little Jack and Sarah played the roles of ring bearer and flower girl. Jason bought a luxurious home in a popular neighborhood, complete with an 18-hole golf course, club, pool, tennis courts, playgrounds, and parks. He paid $58,350 in cash for the house. The peculiarities began during the wedding celebration itself. For some reason, Molly told her friends that she and Meg, Jason's first wife, had been friends before Meg died of cancer. However, Meg had passed away in 2006 when Molly was not acquainted with Jason and couldn't have known his wife. Meg's death was due to a respiratory illness, not cancer. Regrettably, the happy groom didn't pay much attention to these conversations. Years passed, and the family continued their life in North Carolina. Jason joined the local golf club and became active in the community, while Molly worked as a swimming coach. Men were drawn to Jason for his friendliness, and women admired Molly's baking skills and supermodel figure. They appeared to be the perfect couple, an attractive and sociable husband, a well-groomed and athletic wife. They were the most in-love couple you ever saw, always holding hands, always kissing and laughing. They just seemed very, very happy, a neighbor would later say. Molly had been conditioned since childhood to maintain a prestigious facade for the public, no matter what was happening behind closed doors. In reality, the marriage was fraught with difficulties. Jason resisted Molly's persistent attempts to adopt his 2 children. While it seemed a normal desire for a woman who had stepped into the role of mother, her insistence became so intense and obsessive that it started to frighten Jason. According to his sister, Molly convinced neighbors she was the biological mother of the children and even described her pregnancy with Sarah to acquaintances. The couple constantly argued over the adoption issue. Jason felt unhappy, longing for his home, missing his friends, and the warm family evenings with his brothers and sisters. He seriously considered divorce and returning to Ireland with his son and daughter, which he honestly discussed with Molly. Her reaction was immediate and intensely emotional. After the argument, Jason even hid the children's passports, fearing that Molly might dispose of them to prevent their departure. The more he contemplated divorce, the more desperately she tried to keep him and the children with her. Jason lost his zest for life and began to gain a significant amount of weight, which infuriated his young wife. A husband with excess weight disrupted their perfect public image. The night before the murder, the couple attended a dinner at a neighbor's house, where Molly loudly criticized the amount of food on Jason's plate in front of all the guests. She openly stated that it was unacceptable for someone of his weight to eat so much. Jason left silently. The following night, August 2, 2015, Molly and her father beat Jason to death. On August 1st, Molly's parents, Tom and Sharon, arrived in North Carolina for a visit. The exact purpose of this visit remains a mystery to this day. Some believe Molly and her father pre-planned the visit to ensure Tom was present to assist in committing the crime, while others see it as a routine parental visit. Since Tom and Sharon arrived late in the evening, they decided to give the gifts they brought for the children the next morning. This detail is crucial. They had prepared an aluminum baseball bat for Jack and were planning to give Sarah a tennis racket. After dinner, Tom and Sharon retired to the guest bedroom in the basement. Molly and Jason went to their bedroom on the first floor, and the children went upstairs to their respective rooms on the second floor. According to Molly, Sarah woke her up at 3 a.m. after a nightmare. Molly calmed her down and took her back to bed. By the time she returned, Jason, she claimed, was awake and furiously angry, leading to a fight that ultimately resulted in his death. As the supposed altercation began, Tom, a former FBI agent, allegedly heard strange noises from his daughter and son-in-law's bedroom. Concerned, he grabbed the baseball bat intended for Jack and headed to the room. Upon entering, he claimed to see Jason choking Molly. Jason, noticing his father-in-law, tightened his grip and dragged Molly to the bathroom, threatening to kill her. Tom pleaded with Jason to release Molly, but seeing his requests were futile, he intervened to save his daughter. Tom stated that his initial bat strike didn't stop Jason from strangling Molly, so he continued to hit him. Eventually, Jason released Molly, attempting to grab the bat. A struggle ensued, with Jason wrenching the bat away and knocking Tom to the floor. Tom claimed Molly, in a state of extreme fear, grabbed a brick from the bedside table and struck Jason on the head. Both father and daughter, fearing for their lives, continued to attack the enraged man until they realized he was no longer a threat. By calling the rescue service, Tom described the incident as a fight where his son-in-law had assaulted his daughter, and now Jason urgently needed help. However, when emergency services arrived, the scene indicated something far more brutal than simple self-defense. The bedroom walls and floor were drenched in blood, with splatters also on the ceiling and furniture. Jason's skull was so shattered that pieces of his scalp were scattered across the floor. The medical examiner noted in the report that the number of blows was impossible to determine, as pieces of skull fell onto the table during the autopsy. The first responding police officers noted a stark discrepancy between Jason Corbett's horrific injuries and the fact that both father and daughter were unscathed, their clothes intact. Not even Molly's thin bracelet was broken, despite her claim of a life-and-death struggle. Another key observation. Some emergency responders noticed blood on the brick, and Jason's body began to dry out and he was cold to the touch, indicating a significant period of time before the emergency call was made. And why would someone keep a brick on their nightstand? Detectives questioned its presence in the bedroom. Molly explained she planned to paint the brick with the children and was examining it before bed, thinking about the design. The case hinged on appearances, the external details and testimonies of those involved. During questioning, Molly confessed she had endured years of severe abuse from her husband, keeping silent for fear of losing the children. She said she consulted lawyers who advised collecting evidence of abuse for a custody battle, leading her to plant recording devices around the house. She presented these recordings to the detectives.
Tom claimed during questioning that Jason had repeatedly physically abused Molly. However, the investigation found no evidence of physical abuse during Molly's life with Jason. At the trial, the defense insisted on self-defense. Jason Corbett was portrayed as a drinking, violent man who emotionally and physically abused his family. The defense even found people suggesting he might have killed his first wife, Meg. The family doctor testified about Jason's complaints of mood swings. He felt he was getting angry recently without reason. Social workers interviewed the children. Jack and Sarah said their father was always angry and even hurt their mother. The prosecution presented expert reports indicating that while the audio recordings made by Molly showed Jason's temper, they did not evidence physical violence. Toxicology reports also found traces of a psychiatric medication prescribed to Molly in Jason's blood, suggesting this may have caused his mood irregularities. Jason's family, who knew him as a calm and kind man, were shocked by the defense's claims and insisted that Molly fabricated the story and likely drugged him with illegal drugs to cause behavioral instability for her records. A bloodstain pattern analyst called by the prosecution testified that the blood spatter trajectory did not match a self-defense scenario. The attack on Jason began while he was getting up, and he was defenseless, lying face down when he was repeatedly struck. In 2017, Molly and Tom were found guilty of murder and sentenced to 20 to 25 years each in prison. They filed an appeal a week later and eventually succeeded in getting the North Carolina Supreme Court to overturn their second-degree murder conviction in 2021, leading to a new trial. They were released on $200,000 bail, leaving Davidson County Jail within an hour of each other. In October 2023, father and daughter made a plea deal for involuntary manslaughter. During the November trial, statements from Jason Corbett's now-grown children, Jack and Sarah, living with their aunt in Ireland, were heard. 17-year-old Sarah Corbett stated that defense witnesses and attorneys distorted her words when she was 8 to aid Molly Corbett and Tom Martins in obtaining lighter prison sentences. Molly Martins taught me to shoplift, vomit, and lie. She used to hit my brother and starve him. When I was just 5, she told me my father killed my mother. I really loved Molly, and she manipulated me. Jack Corbett confessed in his statement that he lied to investigators when he was 10. I lost so much of myself since that day. My words were used as a weapon to help Molly and Thomas avoid punishment for killing my father. I never saw my father harm Molly. He was a loving and honorable man, and they did everything to tarnish his good name. While my friends enjoy parties, I'm in therapy, learning to live with the fact that I lied and helped them get away. The children asked Judge Hall to sentence Molly Corbett and Thomas Martins to the maximum 25 years. Perhaps their plea deal helped them avoid this sentence. In November 2023, father and daughter were sentenced to a minimum of 4 and a maximum of 6 years, with credit for the 44 months already served. They were also ordered to avoid contact with the Corbett family. Thomas Martin's lawyer expects his client to be released in 7 months. Sarah, with her Aunt Tracy's help, wrote and published a series of children's books aimed at helping kids cope with loneliness after losing a loved one. Jack became a singer, songwriter, and skilled rugby player. Both siblings continue to fight for justice in their father's case.
Parents can be very intrusive, arrogant, and demanding in their demands. Sometimes it brings some benefit, and sometimes it does not. There are times when this demanding is even dangerous. Brett Ryan was in just such a situation. He grew up in a prosperous and large Canadian family where his parents, Bill and Susan, had 4 sons. It might seem that having so many children, and especially boys, is hard and exhausting parenting labor. But it wasn't for everyone. Their parents tried to teach the younger Ryans by example. Their father, in addition to his prestigious job at the Toronto Star daily newspaper, had many hobbies, such as sports, yoga, and psychology. And as for Susan, she was very hardworking, and the whole family home rested on her shoulders. She not only gave her time to her husband and children, but also kept a huge house in a prestigious area of Toronto in perfect condition, and all this without the help of gardeners and craftsmen. Neighbors passing by the family home for a while lingered to admire the huge and blooming garden through the fence. It could not be said that Brett was the family favorite. No, Suzanne loved everyone equally, but from the outside it might have seemed that it was Brett who was scolded least of all for obedience. The thing was, he could always get out of any situation. Even when all the evidence pointed to his involvement, he found a way to prove that he was only partially involved. And amazingly, that ability helped him have a lot of friends. Yeah, Brett was pretty damn popular at school. Everyone wanted to be friends with him, or at least be able to say hello by the hand. Just like his older brothers, Brett went to university after high school. Brett always wanted to be better than his brothers, so he took out an ad in the local newspaper offering Toronto residents a service to paint houses and fences. At first things were going really well. The young man had his first money. Susan was even proud of her son and always held him up as an example to others. But it's one thing when this money is a part-time job, and quite another when you drop out of university to spend all your free time breathing in the smell of paint and not having any education. Yes, after a while, Brett dropped out of university. While for the first couple of years Brett felt confident in front of his older brothers, after a while, when Christopher and Leland graduated and found jobs in their specialties, Brett's authority began to fade. Christopher worked for the City of Toronto Transit Commission, and Leland became the family artist and designer. After their studies, they moved out of their parents' home, and Brett, to avoid spending part of his earnings on rent, stayed with his father, mother, and younger brother, who attended a school for gifted children. With each passing year, Brett became more and more desperate. Because of his debts and inability to pay them off, he developed depression. By 2007, when Brett was already 26 years old, his debt had passed $60,000. Brett was considered a pretty smart guy, but he didn't know how to use his mind. At the same time, he did not show how bad he was. He always smiled, helped everyone, was a participant of volunteer movements. No one could believe how big the black hole in his soul was. Finally came that fateful moment when nothing could be done, at least not legally. On October 28, 2007, Brett had no orders for house painting or any other work around the house. Orders are always extremely scarce in the fall. Everyone who wanted to had already painted their houses in the spring or summer. Winter was approaching, from which you should not expect any big earnings. There was no time to wait for anything. Brett put on all the old clothes he had in his closet, a hat, a long sweater he'd gotten from his older brother, a scarf his mother had knitted. The scarf was comically long. Brett hadn't even worn it before, but finally the scarf came in handy. He wrapped it around his face, leaving only a narrow slit for his eyes, and headed for the bank that was on the outskirts of his neighborhood. He was clutching some thick folder and limped playfully on his right foot. Brett waited his turn at the bank, and when he was finally summoned by an employee, he went up to her and told her in a quiet voice that he had a gun with him. He also told her to take all the money out of the bank's cash register and give it to him. Otherwise, he would shoot here, and the first person he would kill would be her. The girl with trembling hands handed him all the cash she had in the cash register, and Brett quietly walked out of the building so as not to attract the attention of the guards, and when he was on the street, he ran away. He counted the money he had stolen. It wasn't very much, a little over $1,000. To pay off his debts, he would have to rob about 60 banks. Sounds fantastic, but there was no other way out. For the first few days, the novice robber feared that the police would somehow still be able to get to him, so he did not appear at home. He told his mother that he had an order in the neighboring town, and he himself spent the night in the car. Periodically, Brett crept up to his house to see if there was a police car in the bushes. No, it was quiet. No one was looking for him. That's good. So he's headed in the right direction. The first robbery was followed by a second, third, fourth. Brett changed clothes each time. He didn't wear his old clothes anymore. He bought them secondhand, or even found them in the trash. After the crime, he burned the used clothes. Brett also purchased a beard from a store that sold outfits for costume parties. The bank employees he threatened always noticed his beard and later testified that the attacker was a bearded man. Toronto newspapers began publishing a number of articles about the bearded robber. But the bearded robber never made a fortune in robberies. The maximum amount that could be stolen did not exceed $3,000. Finally, Brett had a misfire. The police spotted his car on the surveillance cameras and followed him all the way home. By that time, they still had no direct evidence of his guilt. It was decided to just follow the suspect. It was as if Brett sensed the outside surveillance and did not go on a robbery spree for the next 15 days, although before that, the intervals between crimes were 3 or 4 days. The cops thought they were on the wrong trail and wasting their time suspecting an innocent guy, but finally, luck smiled on them. Brett left the house, got into a car, and later got out of the car not far from the bank, wearing a different, strange outfit. He went into the branch, stayed there for a while, but at the exit, he was met by the police to finally handcuff him and announced that the much-discussed bearded robber had finally been caught. Brett was under investigation for 7 months. He was charged with robbery with a firearm. Interestingly, despite having a gun permit, the bearded robber always came to the bank empty-handed. He didn't even have a kitchen knife with him. In total, he was charged with 19 counts and was sent to prison. From there, Brett, just like his family, filed multiple appeals. This yielded results. Only 8 of the 19 counts were upheld. But Brett didn't stop there. As soon as he had the opportunity to apply for parole, he took it. In his petition, Brett asked to take into account the fact that he went to these crimes being in a severe depression, caused by 2 failed relationships, as well as a large amount of debt. At the same time, he once again noted that he went to the crimes without weapons, absolutely not planning to harm anyone. His remarks were accepted, but in order to get out of prison early, he had to undergo a session with a psychologist. The sessions had a positive effect on Brett. All the time he was behind bars, he did not communicate with his family, and now he himself has made a step towards getting closer and restoring relations with his family. The positive changes were noticed by the commissioners, so on November 24, 2010, Brett was released. This freedom, for which the young man fought so zealously, turned out to be very bitter and even harder than it was before. Who was Brett before? A painter with a heavy burden on his soul. What was he now? Brett the bank robber, Brett the ex-con. With such a tainted background, he was never hired by any company, and those who hired him for house painting services, as soon as they recognized him as the bearded robber, refused his services. Also the neighbors, yes, the same ones who used to praise Susan's garden and visit, now began to spread various unpleasant rumors. The whole Ryan family hastily sold the house and moved to Scarborough. Susan started growing her new garden again, and Brett did get a job with a trading company, but his pay was not high. His parents were also helping him with money to rebuild his university education. Brett still visited a psychologist, and each time the specialist advised him the same thing: don't break the connection with your family. The psychologist's advice really worked. Despite this, Brett's financial well-being left much to be desired. In September 2011, the first happy accident in his life happened. He met Kristen Baxter. Kristen was just a fantastic girl. She had her own apartment, the windows of which overlooked the sea, thanks to which the young couple opened a beautiful landscape. She was engaged in sports, which allowed her to keep her body in shape. And most importantly, she did not care about Brett's past. They also traveled periodically as a couple and had even been to Australia. Brett's father and mother, watching his relationship with the girl develop, were very happy. In addition, they were sure that their son will finally take his head, and Kristen will push him in every possible way to develop and finally take his place in society. Brett felt that life was starting to get better, but there was an unfortunate event that was out of his control and that disrupted the building of a new phase. Brett's father died. For him, it was a real shock. His depressive state began to return, because of which Brett began to visit a psychologist more often. He also had to spend a lot of time with his mother and help her with money, which he already had a little. A long relationship with Kristen had to be developed. Young people were not teenagers, which is enough just to meet and spend free time together. Being madly in love with this enchanting blonde, Brett decided to take a serious step. He had some savings, plus he talked to his mother and said that he wanted to build a family with Kristen. And to do this, he needed to make her an offer that Kristen could not refuse him and remember this day for the rest of her life. Susan realized what her son was getting at and gave him money to buy a ring. It should be noted that the couple had discussed their future before that. And no, Kristen didn't need some expensive gift or something like that. It was enough for her to get a proposal from Brett as a confirmation of his serious intentions. But he still decided to splurge and bought a gold ring with a huge diamond for his beloved. Kristen, of course, told him, yes. Then, as is usually the case, the young people began planning their wedding. Brett agreed with all of Kristen's decisions and nodded approvingly, but he was horrified at how expensive it was and how much he needed to think about his job. He found an engineering job opening for a large technology company on the internet, put together a resume, and responded to it. He even had a successful interview and was accepted. Brett was happy at the time. He immediately excited his fiancée and his mother with this news, from whom he again asked for money to buy himself an expensive suit to wear to work. Once again, his mother did not refuse her son. When the suit was already bought, Brett received a call from the company saying that they had to refuse him because the security service had found out about his criminal past. For Brett, it was like thunder that broke over him. His mood began to plummet immediately, and he finally gave up. Why waste time on this endless series of interviews, waiting for answers, if in the end, no one wants to hire a criminal, even if corrected? And most importantly, why waste time studying? Brett decided that it would be better to spend the money his mother and older brothers gave him for his university studies on his wedding to Kristen, and so he did. Brett was back in the situation he had recently gotten out of. He didn't tell his family that he had dropped out of university, and most importantly, he didn't tell his counselor. He also didn't tell anyone that he had been turned down for an engineering job. He put on a shirt, tie, suit, and went to paint houses, changing into a change of clothes right on the way, and told his relatives that he was working in an office. In addition, in his social networks, Brett constantly posted various photos from the office, or from some business event, of course, previously downloaded from the internet. And also being near his loved ones, he often pretended as if his phone was ringing and he urgently needed to solve some work issues. He was very skillful at making dust in his eyes, and no one would have thought that Brett was actually a common painter. In September 2016, after a 5-year relationship with Kristen, Brett planned to have a wedding. He even agreed to rent an expensive restaurant where it was necessary to pay $100 for each guest. The whole Ryan family was very happy because Brett finally took himself in hand, has a prestigious job, lives in a fancy apartment, and he has a stunning bride. But they had no idea that Brett's lies had gone too far and there was no way to get out of it unscathed. By then, the wedding was only a month away and the event required an investment. Our hero again and again borrowed money from his mother, and when he realized that she was no longer able to help him, he literally demanded that she change her job to a better paying one. Also, he planned a bachelor party in August, to which he invited all his friends and brothers. As the fuse of this bombshell began to burn out, Brett still decided to tell his counselor about everything. Brett had been lying to his family for a year about working for a technology company as an engineer. The psychologist was saddened that the guy he'd been leading for so long had gotten off the right track again and said that Brett just needed to come clean to his mother. Brett thought about it for a long time, procrastinated, but eventually did so. His mother was insanely upset because she had spent so long telling everyone what a wonderful son she had. She also demanded that Brett tell Kristen everything because if he kept quiet, she would. She also warned her son that his brothers were already aware of the situation and they were on her side. Brett couldn't do that. After all, he'd had such a hard time telling his mother the truth, and he couldn't tell Kristen about his lies. Yes, he knew that there was less than a month until the wedding, which wouldn't happen because of his lying. And indeed, it would have been better for Kristen to know everything in advance, but he still kept quiet. It wasn't clear what Brett was counting on, and he also couldn't help thinking that his mother would really tell his fiancée everything, and then the scandal would be unavoidable. Brett flinched every time Kristen's phone rang, and even stopped breathing until he realized that it wasn't his mother calling, but another friend of his future wife, asking her about her wedding plans and giving her advice. Finally, he figured out how to silence his mother permanently. When Brett was convicted of robbery, he was forbidden to use firearms, so the boy decided that the best way to carry out his plan was to use a crossbow. And besides, it's a pretty silent murder weapon. One of his late father's hobbies was crossbow shooting in the garden at targets. He taught Brett how to shoot too. Yes, he was good at target shooting, except that it was unlikely his late father thought his son would use that skill in such a way. Brett bought the crossbow and arrows at a sporting goods store and hid it behind the construction debris that lay in Susan's garage. At home, he arranged what he thought was an ingenious alibi invention. He tied a spoon to a fan and set the fan itself on a timer. When the timer went off, the fan turned on, and the spoon moved across the computer keyboard, sending pre-prepared comments to YouTube. From the outside, it must have looked like Brett had spent all day at home, watching videos and commenting on them. On the morning of August 25th, Brett dressed up in strange clothes that hid his face, left the house through the back door to avoid the security cameras, and took a train to his parents' house to get rid of anyone who might disrupt his and Kristen's well-being once and for all. Susan was very surprised at her son's unexpected arrival. She had not been feeling well that day, but Brett, despite his mother's condition, once again began to persuade her and even demand not to tell his future wife anything. The mother categorically refused him. Then he began to get angry, and Susan, sensing something wrong, seeing her son's mad eyes, warned him that she had already called Christopher and he was on his way to them. Brett was going crazy. He ran to the garage, got a crossbow, but his anger and adrenaline overflowed him with such force that he couldn't even make a shot. He just bludgeoned his mother with the butt of the gun, and finally, to be sure that she was finally dead, he tightened the rope around her neck. After throwing plastic bags over the body, Brett loaded the crossbow with arrows and hid in the bushes waiting for his brother to arrive. After a while, Christopher arrived, started calling for his mother or his brother, but in response was shot in the neck from behind, which caused him to die within a few minutes. The next victim was the youngest brother, Alexander. As it turns out, Susan managed to call him too. He was also shot in the neck, but either the arrow did not go deep or did not hit vital arteries, so Alexander did not die immediately, but began to scream and call for help. All this time, Leland was in the house, sleeping in his room on the second floor, and had no idea of the carnage that was going on in the garage and in the garden, and most importantly that it was his own brother who was committing the crime. His sleep was disturbed by a scream, and coming downstairs, Leland saw Brett trying to strangle Alexander. A fight broke out between Leland and Brett, and as soon as Leland got the upper hand and managed to push his brother aside, he immediately ran to the neighbors and called the police. Brett stayed in the house. He had nowhere to run. He realized that this was the moment he had completely screwed up his life. There was nothing to do. He took out his phone and wrote Kristen a letter asking her to forgive him. The police arrived at the crime scene and saw a bloody Brett, who was sitting next to his equally bloody but still alive brother Alexander, who would die later in the hospital. Brett himself asked the policeman to handcuff him and take him to the station, where he would confess to everything. He also said that his mother's body was hidden under packages in the garage, but it was impossible to help her. At the police station, and later at the trial, Brett admitted that he did not want to kill Susan. His plan was only to scare her. Christopher and Alexander, on the other hand, he did plan to kill that day, but as witnesses, and if they hadn't arrived, they would still be alive. Just like almost 10 years ago, he tried to justify everything with his depressive state, but it did not soften his sentence. And despite the fact that the judge took into account the fact that Brett confessed to everything himself and did not cause the investigation any trouble, the young man received 3 life sentences, 1 for each murder, with the right to get parole in 2041. As for Leland, He's not speaking to reporters, but he's known throughout Toronto as the sole survivor of that carnage.
This story is set in Spokane, Washington, the second largest city in the state. As beautiful and attractive to tourists as the city may be on the outside, it can be just as dangerous to its residents. According to the state, Spokane County has the highest crime rate in Washington, twice the state average. So today's tale of young Cinderella has a beautiful exterior and a bitter flavor inside. The Holden family, a typical American family, had lived in Spokane for a long time. They adored children, so the house was always full of them. Judy and John Holden had 2 daughters and an adopted son, Joshua. The adult daughters had long since left the family and lived on their own. Their only son, Joshua, however, remained with his parents. Large, melancholic, and always frowning young man could not create his own family and therefore reluctantly stayed at his parents' house. The desire to have a stable income in the form of significant benefits forced the Holden family to take more than 1 and not 2 children from the orphanage. Thus, one day, a sweet little girl named Courtney appeared in the Holden family. Courtney Corinne Holden was born on February 28, 1992, and 2 years later found herself in an orphanage. Children of different ages dreamily prayed to the Almighty to give them a mom and dad. And one joyful day, the girl's wish came true. Little Courtney went to Spokane. Courtney began living with Joshua and several other foster children. When the door closed behind her, the girl's dreams of a caring and loving family remained only dreams. If in the orphanage Courtney's life seemed sad and joyless, at the Holdens it turned into a real nightmare. From a very young age, she was forced to do all sorts of chores around the house. She had to clean the whole house, wash the dishes for all the family members after every meal. What was especially surprising was that the Holdens treated the other foster children much better, and no one could understand the reason for their hatred of this sweet girl. Judy Holden had reached a respectable age by then, and Courtney was the last child they had taken from the orphanage. Perhaps that was the source of their inexplicable anger. Courtney was even forbidden to go outside without permission. People who visited their home often heard Judy and Joshua mistreat Courtney, calling her Cinderella, as if she were a fairy tale character who in real life was a slave to her stepmother and evil sisters. Courtney found herself in a similar role. However, the girl turned out to be very responsive and over the years of living with the Holdens got used to harsh conditions. She was afraid of her foster mother, and her brother Joshua inspired terror in her with his mere presence. He forbade her from socializing with her peers, and she had no cell phone or other modern conveniences. She never left the house without need or permission. She only got a breath of fresh air, like socializing with neighbors, when the house was empty by going out into the backyard. Courtney's upbringing took place in just such an environment. Over time, she grew up and just got used to her life. She didn't become embittered, always treating her foster parents with respect because she didn't know any other life and had no idea of a normal family. Courtney found some freedom when Joshua, due to irreconcilable differences with his parents, moved in with his sister for a significant amount of time. For Courtney, it was the happiest period of her life. She finally got a long-awaited taste of freedom, free to leave the house, go for walks, and meet her peers. Time passed. Courtney graduated from high school and fell in love for the first time. Michael turned out to be a worthy partner for her. She felt care and attention from a man she had never received from anyone before. After each meeting, Courtney was over the moon with happiness. Their relationship lasted until 2011 when they had a son. Michael, in despair, begged his beloved to move to him and live a full family, but for an unknown reason, the young mother refused him and did not move, continuing to live in the house Holden, and stopped all romantic relationships with Michael. By then, the Holden home was empty. The foster children had grown up and moved away. John Holden, Courtney's foster father, had passed away, so for a long time she lived only with her foster mother Judy. Michael was only allowed to visit his son with Judy's permission. During the period when Courtney's brother Joshua was away, their life with their son was quite peaceful. But after his father's death in 2014, Joshua returned and began to control the family home fiercely.
He installed multiple surveillance cameras around their home on Hero Avenue, about a block from Rogers Middle School in northeast Spokane. There were signs scattered throughout the yard that read, "Smile, you're being filmed," and several cameras pointed in different directions. The security cameras made Courtney anxious again, for she knew that going outside could get her in trouble from Joshua for running away. Courtney's life once again became unbearable. Around 2015, Courtney confessed to a neighbor that she was once again forbidden to have a cell phone, keep social media accounts, communicate with anyone outside the family, drive, or even leave the house without Joshua's permission. The birth of Courtney's son made Joshua Holden so angry that he forced her to cut off all contact with Michael. Courtney silently complied. Neighbors noticed bruises on Courtney's face and arms, and when asked about their origin, she frankly admitted, "Joshua beats me." Concerned neighbors wondered why Courtney tolerates such treatment and tried to help her in every way possible. They contacted the police to draw attention to Courtney's distress, but the Holdens managed to keep the case quiet each time, as the victim herself never openly admitted that she was under family control from her brother. Eventually, Courtney was stripped of the privilege of interacting with the neighbors, who have since seen her outside only in the evenings, as she was not allowed to go out during the day. Courtney again silently complied. No one knew Joshua like Courtney did. A tall, large, and obese man, he possessed tremendous physical strength and never held back in his insults. Joshua's friends described him as a man with paranoid tendencies, violent and unpredictable by nature. He once publicly bragged about his ability to easily cut short a life and effortlessly dispose of a body. He had a notable criminal history. In 2005, he was charged with assault and harassment, but due to lack of evidence and the victim's unwillingness to cooperate with the police, he was released. In 2003, he was also suspected of assaulting a woman and misconduct, but the perpetrator could not be identified. In 2006, Joshua was arrested for assaulting his mother and for burglary. These incidents forced him to leave his parents' home for several years. Upon returning, Joshua became even more ferocious. He installed cameras not only outside, but also inside the house to completely control Courtney. The young mother almost stopped socializing with friends, saying she was afraid to go anywhere for fear Joshua would find out and things would get worse. One person communicated with Courtney every day via Facebook until Joshua found out she had an account. "I have to leave. I have to leave. Josh is coming," she wrote in her last message almost 2 years ago. After that, her account was permanently blocked. Acquaintances described the dynamics within the Holden family as peculiar. People familiar with the family have been perplexed as to why Courtney's son calls Judy Mom, and Joshua is referred to as Dad, while his biological mother is referred to exclusively by her first name, leading some to speculate that perhaps Joshua is actually the boy's father. Neighbors and acquaintances have condemned the Holdens for their unusual lifestyle and antisocial behavior, preferring to stay away from their home. In August 2018, after another argument, Courtney hurriedly packed her belongings into a suitcase and ran outside. A furious Judy yelled after her, "Come home!" To which Courtney replied, "I'm not staying here anymore." Moments later, an enraged Joshua, over 6 feet tall and weighing 300 pounds, forcibly picked Courtney up and carried her back into the house. Judy slammed the door shut. According to the neighbor, she was unable to resist. That was the last time this neighbor, and possibly the rest of the family, saw Courtney. A young woman who had lived a life of invisibility, she still was. It took nearly 2 years before neighbors and acquaintances began to worry about her disappearance. In October 2019, a year and a half after her disappearance, concerns about Courtney Holden's whereabouts were expressed by Michael and his current girlfriend. They hadn't seen Courtney in almost 2 years, and the father was anxious to see his son. The father of Courtney's son filed a missing persons report with the police. On October 24th, police officers, armed with a search warrant, went to the Holdens' home and were surprised to find that Courtney was indeed not there. Neither Joshua nor Judy wanted to cooperate with authorities.
Courtney's stepmother allowed the detectives to look into her room, but then asked them to leave the house as soon as possible. Search dogs were even brought in, but to no avail. The Holdens claimed Courtney abandoned her son and ran away. They were unable to explain who may have continued to cash Social Security benefits into her account, or who was using electronic food stamps. However, on the same day the Holdens' home was searched, Judy and Joshua withdrew the remaining $600 from Courtney's bank account. Coincidence? The next day, an unidentified woman identified herself as Courtney and called the National Crime Information Center of America. She stated that she was safe and did not want to be found. Police traced the call and identified the woman as one of Courtney's half-sisters. Later, Joshua and Judy told many conflicting stories about Courtney's disappearance. They once claimed she had run off with a truck driver, while another version said it was a secret lover she was hiding from everyone. Courtney's absence and the ever-changing testimony of those she lived with made the Holdens suspect. Clearly having something to hide, Joshua and Judy Holden hastily left Spokane in late October 2019. Their flight only convinced detectives of their involvement in Courtney's disappearance. The Holdens were tracked down in Texas at the home of one of Judy's adopted daughters. Authorities were able to charge them with cashing benefits intended for Courtney as well as identity theft, which led to their arrest and incarceration in a Texas jail. In early October, the Spokane Police Department attempted to check on Courtney's welfare, but that quickly turned into a missing persons case, which was turned over to Major Crimes Detective Randy Lesser. Lesser gave an update on the investigation after the search warrants he filed in Spokane County Superior Court became known. This account of Courtney's disappearance and the investigation is based on police interviews and court documents. Courtney was officially reported missing. Alerts were sent out to all states, and several news programs broadcast about the case, which began an active search. When patrol officers and detectives visited the home for various reasons, Joshua and Judy Holden refused to cooperate with the investigation. Unusual behavior when it comes to welfare checks and missing persons cases. On the day Courtney was reported missing, a woman who gave her name called Crime Check and said she was okay. The police dispatcher also spoke to the woman posing as Courtney. It was later revealed that it was actually Courtney's sister, who wouldn't tell Lesser why she was impersonating her, presumably to draw suspicion away from Judy and end the search. "It bothers me that she might be dead," Lesser said in an interview. Lesser expressed particular concern about Joshua's past. Joshua had been charged with assault in the past, but the case was dropped shortly before trial when the victim stopped cooperating with the prosecution. Investigators were in the process of obtaining DNA evidence, and court documents in the case indicated Holden was a suspect in another assault in 2003. Neighbors and family members described Joshua as unstable, violent, and diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. Neighbors mentioned that Joshua was unemployed and Judy was afraid of him. Joshua had also been arrested on unlawful imprisonment charges and was convicted of burglary. Family members said Joshua and Judy bragged to them about knowing ways to hide from police, and Joshua talked about how easy it would be to end a person's life and hide the body. "People don't just disappear, especially if they have a son," Lesser noted. Court documents say Courtney was a loving mother who would never abandon her son. For a year and a half, Courtney was not seen outside her home, with Joshua and Judy telling neighbors and relatives that she was traveling with a boyfriend, an unnamed truck driver whom no one knew. Sometimes there were rumors that she had eloped with her fiancé. Other times she was supposedly just at the house, but not available for visits. Judy told Lesser that Courtney had only been home a few days when he knocked on their door in early October. According to her, Courtney left on foot with her son. According to court documents, when Lesser asked Judy for her phone number, she closed the door in his face. She then reluctantly let police officers inside to look into Courtney's room. She was very nervous, Lesser said. The house was extremely cluttered, with piles of belongings taking up every available space, Lesser wrote in court documents. Courtney's room was also cluttered, and the mattress lay bare. It gave the impression that no one lived there, Lesser noted. At one point, Judy panicked, losing sight of one of the detectives behind the closed door. She ordered the investigators to leave when Lesser asked them to check the rest of the house for Courtney's son. Later that day, neighbors told Lesser that they saw Joshua, Judy, and one of Courtney's sisters leave in a van with the boy. Detective Lesser also found it suspicious that Courtney, who suffered from a chronic medical condition, had not seen a doctor since October 2017. She received her last prescription in July 2018, although she had been receiving medication every month prior to her disappearance. Despite the gaps in her medical records, money continued to be withdrawn from Courtney's bank account every month, and her card was used for groceries. Surveillance footage confirmed that Joshua and Judy were shopping with the boy. The cameras also recorded the couple withdrawing the remaining money from Courtney's bank account on the day she was reported missing in early October. By October 24, Joshua and Judy had left their home. Lesser wrote that the DVR from the home's surveillance system had been removed, and the family's 6 pets were gone when police arrived to execute a search warrant. The cell phone numbers associated with Joshua and Judy were deactivated in mid-November, but 2 new numbers with Texas area codes were activated the same day. About a month after the Holdens left, a neighbor called police to report activity at the house. It was one of Judy's daughters and her husband, who had flown in from Texas to check on the house. They said they hadn't seen Courtney in 2 years and that Judy had retired. The man told police that Joshua and Judy had a child together, but Judy's daughter claimed the boy was Courtney's son. In mid-December, Lesser traveled to Texas to search for Joshua and Judy. Police found them at Judy's daughter's home along with Courtney's son. Joshua and Judy Holden were arrested on charges of identity theft, custody interference, and using Courtney's bank accounts and hiding her son. The boy was found safe and sound and was successfully returned to his father. No charges were filed against other family members. Police searched Judy's home in Spokane with search dogs, but unfortunately found no trace of Courtney. A search of a home in Texas also yielded no clues as to Courtney's whereabouts. Officers also searched a car and trailer belonging to Judy parked in an RV parking lot in Oklahoma. Joshua, 40, and Judy, 74, were in jail in Texas, where they declined to be interviewed by police. They refused to be extradited to Spokane, so police were awaiting a warrant from the governor for their return. Because police could not prove their involvement in Courtney's disappearance, they were likely released. This is probably one of the most in-depth missing person cases. Lesser says of the months-long investigation, "I have 4 notebooks full of different information." Judy and Joshua still claim they had nothing to do with Courtney's disappearance, and police believe she is most likely dead. But unfortunately, there is no way to prove it yet. Despite the aforementioned allegations, Judy and Joshua have not been charged with anything. Many still believe that they know what happened to Courtney. In addition to being known for his violent behavior, Joshua has also stated that he could end a person's life and successfully hide the body from the police. Investigators believe Courtney is dead, but have yet to make any arrests related to her case. To summarize today's story, Courtney was unlucky enough to be part of the Holden family, and this young girl who dreamed of family and love lacked the courage to stand up for herself. She truly believed that even these people who yelled at her, mistreated her, and forced her to work for them were her family. But is it necessary to defend oneself against one's own family? It is deeply unfortunate that Joshua Holden's bold statements in public about ending his life and hiding his body cannot be used as proof of his involvement in Courtney's disappearance, especially since she was never seen again after that fateful evening when he forcibly took her into the house. And no one knows what she went through during those terrible moments, or what atrocities these monsters who called themselves family were doing behind closed doors. There are countless ways to discreetly dispose of a body, using various chemicals that neither experts nor police dogs can detect. This suggests that if Courtney did suffer that night, her spirit still resides at Holden Manor, where she looked for family, but instead found her doom. Her son was taken from the Holden family and placed in his father's care, where he remains to this day. Courtney Holden is still missing in action, Any life, even the most shameful, can be wrapped up in a beautiful wrapper. If you tell it in a calm voice and present the negative character as a victim of circumstances, you are sure to feel sympathy and regret for him. The fact is that many bad people have charisma, strength, cunning, and we sincerely believe that they were not always bad, because often they made such circumstances, and we, without noticing, find excuses for their disreputable deeds. But today we will not justify illegal actions and certainly will not cover anyone. After learning about this case, you will decide for yourself whether their actions are worth justification. On April 4, 2015, emergency services received an eerie call from a local resident. A terrified male voice yelled into the phone to the dispatcher that he had gone into a friend's living room to turn on the lights and check on him, but when he went up to the second floor of the room, he saw blood everywhere. The victim's friend reported that everything was covered in blood, and the injured man was not breathing. After police arrived, the unincorporated community of Alette in Montgomery County was shocked by the brutal murder of 59-year-old local resident Charles Taylor. The crime scene looked like the subject of nightmares and resembled the set of a horror movie. Blood was everywhere, on the carpet, on the paintings, and the couch where the murdered man was located was completely soaked in blood. The brutality of the crime made it look like a grudge drama. After all, definitely, the attacker wanted not only Charles's death, but also to cause him as long as possible unbearable pain, time after time, stabbing a sharp knife. The examination of the house showed no visible signs of forced entry, and Charles's bloody body was lying upstairs in his room, which meant that the criminal knew the house and acted decisively. The forensic medical examination found that Charles Taylor suffered blunt force trauma to the back of his head and 31 stab wounds, as a result of which he died. Charles Taylor was considered a kind and generous man, had an adult son with whom he had a good relationship. He adored his 2 grandchildren and daughter-in-law Amanda. This is the part of life that people see and draw conclusions about the family's well-being. But was this really how things were in the Taylor family? So let's get to the bottom of this ugly family drama. The initial investigation was relatively slow as the police didn't have many leads to work with. They started looking for Charles's acquaintances, but couldn't find anyone who had a motive or intent to harm him. Then came the theory that it was someone in Charles Taylor's family, and it didn't take them long to find out the name of the assailant. In fact, that's when investigators got lucky and were approached by a crime blogger with photos of Amanda Taylor posing for selfies against Charles's lifeless body. She has been put on the wanted list. Amanda Barbara Nicole Taylor was born on March 27, 1991 in Christiansburg, Virginia. There is not much information about Amanda's childhood. It is only known that it was difficult because both of her parents spent some time in prison. Amanda's youth began with a lot of problems that she created for herself. After meeting Mariah Roback, Amanda's illicit life began a merry-go-round. Together, they got into a lot of trouble. On October 23, 2005, according to Montgomery County Sheriff's records, when the girls were just 12 years old, Amanda and Mariah jumped into a car and ran away from home, which they were charged with unauthorized use of a motor vehicle. In early April 2006, Amanda was charged with disorderly conduct at the middle school she attended. She yelled that she hated the place, hated all the people there, and would definitely kill them all. This incident definitely went beyond the threshold of the standard teen drama. And this is only a small known portion of Amanda's police station record. In 9th grade, Amanda met Rex Taylor, who was 2 years older than her, and they began dating. Amanda and Rex were born on the same day, March 27th. They both considered it a sign from above. Amanda dropped out of school completely when she found out she was expecting a baby. She and Rex married and soon had a son, but motherhood did not stop her criminal tendencies. The years of her married life were also punctuated by more run-ins with the law. The number of reports on Amanda Taylor in the police station grew exponentially, so recorded another attempted absconding after stealing a vehicle, a conviction for possession of alcohol, numerous domestic altercations, and a criminal record for possession of a controlled substance. Her husband, Rex Taylor, was not from a model family either, and despite their devotion to each other, Rex desperately struggled with addictions and the depression they caused. From the age of 15, the young lad had an addiction to illegal substances. After a while, the couple had a daughter, and at first, it seemed that Amanda still took up the mind and became a model mother and wife, let even a little not like all American women in their 20s, and with piercings, tattoos, and certainly daily selfies in social networks. But also the family relationship between Amanda and Rex was not quite ordinary. The couple fanatically studied biographies of famous serial criminals and wrote letters to them in prison. Amanda began fantasizing about becoming a criminal herself. But before Amanda could realize this deadly dream, tragedy struck the family. The complicated relationship between the spouses was overshadowed by Amanda's suspicions of her husband's infidelity. In April 2014, their paths finally separated, and the couple parted. Rex returned to the family home, where he again began to use illegal substances. 4 months after the move, his lifeless body was discovered in a shed on the property. He had hanged himself on the day of his son's 7th birthday. After losing her beloved husband, Amanda lived with her mother and friend Mariah Robach from time to time. While staying with her friend Mariah, she also began a friendship with Sean Ball, another member of the Robach family. On March 27, 2015, on their shared birthday, Amanda went to Rex's grave and attempted to end her life. She was rescued and forcibly admitted to a psychiatric hospital because her antics and thought processes were clearly distorted and could bring harm to her and others. But despite her mother's insistence and pleas for prolonged treatment, Amanda was quickly released home. Once she was released from the psychiatric hospital, the situation seemed to escalate because of her unstable personality problems. So Mariah and her husband asked Amanda to move out. They also kicked out Mr. Ball, who had fallen madly in love with Amanda. It was during this period of time, when her only true friends seemed to have turned their backs on her, that Amanda developed a deep desire to kill, and the inspiration for this was none other than her late husband, Rex Taylor. She wanted to do Rex justice and make him proud of her, and to do that, it was imperative that someone be skillfully taken dead. During his lifetime, Rex also had a fascination with serial criminals, so much so that his interest had long gone beyond a hobby. He socialized closely with criminals, and it was a friendship he was proud of in his lifetime. Imagine walking out of your house one morning to your mailbox and finding an envelope addressed to you from a notorious serial criminal who was arrested in 1980. Inside the envelope, you are relieved to find no creepy mementos, but instead find a birthday card for your young child along with a handwritten message. Some might argue that such a message would be as horrifying as receiving a severed finger or strand of hair. Either way, for most people, receiving anything in the mail from a serial criminal would be abnormal. But not for Amanda and Rex Taylor's family. Rex's behavior and his willingness to communicate and receive experiences from known serial criminals and Amanda's obsession with crime has been confirmed by some horrifying revelations of past social media posts under her account. In several posts, Amanda glorifies a mass of criminals and their brutal attacks, including the mastermind behind the largest terrorist attack in American history, Timothy McVeigh, and 2 young men, Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris, who staged a mass crime at Collin High School. She aspired to become one of those ruthless criminals she idolized so much, and of course decided to start her career as a criminal with a vengeance. After a while, Amanda accused Rex's father, Charlie Taylor, of being responsible for her husband's death, claiming that he had not helped Rex get rid of his addiction to pills, but had instead accustomed his son to illegal substances. And the cynicism and cold-bloodedness with which she took revenge on her father-in-law Charlie Taylor will send shivers down your spine. To commit her first major murder, she needed an assistant who would unconditionally agree with her actions. She was afraid she wouldn't be able to do it all by herself the first time, and she needed a willing accomplice to back her up if she got scared. And one Amanda already had, of course. It was the man in love with her, Sean Ball. The day she would take control of him was only a matter of time. Sean soon became the willing accomplice Amanda was looking for. However, he had no idea what he was getting himself into. So Sean and Amanda devised their sinister plan with military precision and put it into action. On a spring April afternoon in 2015, Amanda and Sean went to Charles Taylor's dilapidated home in nearby Ironton, Virginia, At exactly 3:27 in the afternoon, the number that marks Rex and Amanda's birth dates, Charles had to give her money to fill an Easter basket for her beloved grandchildren. They sat and talked sweetly for about 30 minutes. Then Amanda plopped down on the couch next to Charles, and it was as if a switch had been flicked in her head. Amanda's behavior changed dramatically. She violently began stabbing Charles with a knife, at which time Sean hit Charles in the head with a tire iron. Then, after stunning Charles, Amanda again deeply stabbed the knife into his chest. At this point, it was like she couldn't see anything around her from rage, and Charles just looked at her and asked, "What are you doing?" As she stabbed him, he reached out and grabbed her hair, but Amanda continued to stab him, and he continued to scream. Amanda Taylor stabbed her father-in-law Charles Taylor 31 times with a sharp bayonet knife. Every time she looked into his eyes, it was important to her that he knew she was the one who was killing him, and she wanted to feel his last breath. She wanted death for Charles to be a personal revenge. She stopped as her rage began to subside and the entire room was splattered with blood. But Amanda didn't stop there. She did something even more outrageous by taking a picture of herself next to the body and posting the picture on her social media accounts. Later that day, Amanda's mother received a disturbing phone call from an unknown number. With Amanda's voice on the other end of the line, she confessed through tears how much she loved her mom and how precious everything she had done for her, and through her tears, she shared that she had done what she had to do, and it was something very bad. Her mom sensed the situation, and it was clear to her that something terrible had happened. She begged her daughter to come home to Christiansburg, but Amanda refused the idea and stated that she and Sean were on their way to Pittsburgh. It was no secret that Amanda was on a downward spiral, and it all started with a traumatic event that occurred almost 8 months ago when her husband, Rex Taylor, who had struggled with depression and illicit substance abuse for several years, hanged himself. Authorities were subsequently shocked when they checked Amanda's social media profile. She was clearly very proud of the crime she had committed. Hoping for a quick resolution, the police issued a warrant for her arrest. However, by then, Amanda and Sean had already escaped. Amanda and Sean took a rather scenic route to escape, as if they were not on the run, but planning a wonderful vacation. They took the Blue Ridge Parkway from Virginia to North Carolina. Judging from the crime scene photos, which show the sheer brutality of the crime, the officers had great fears that the perpetrators would continue to kill. And they were right, for Amanda didn't stop there. However, Amanda was not going to go unpunished for her crimes. After carrying out her intended crimes, she planned to eventually punish herself as well. Nor did she seek to keep her deed a secret. Shortly after she went on the road with Sean Ball, she began publishing posts on social media, taking responsibility for the murder and explaining that she did it for her husband. But Amanda and Sean weren't just on the run, they were stalking their next victim. Having committed her first crime, which Amanda thought was perfect, she couldn't stop. She needed to keep killing. At a gas station, they withdrew cash, filled up the car, and proceeded to Tennessee. Sean tried to talk Amanda into stopping and just going on the run, hiding, laying low. But Amanda, having tasted blood, was determined to fulfill her desire to commit another crime, and she would come very close. They stocked up on ammunition at a sporting goods store, then stopped at a Fleabag motel in Tennessee. After spending the night in a roadside motel, they left the next day to fulfill Amanda's bloody wish. Along the way, Amanda notices 2 young girls at a rest stop on Blue Ridge Boulevard who could be her next victims. She told Sean that she was going to bring these girls in so he could shoot them. They needed money, and he agreed, so Amanda went out to lead them to the car. But when she brought them in, Sean refused to shoot them. Amanda was furious. She got back in the car and drove away. Unable to calm down, she stopped the car in the driveway and pounced on her accomplice. Sean was now in her sights. Amanda pulled a revolver out of the glove compartment, got out of the car, and walked to the passenger side where Sean sat with his eyes closed in terror. She was so beyond furious, but she spotted a random jogger right in front of her and quickly pointed the gun at him and pulled the trigger. As luck would have it, Amanda missed, and the sound of the gunshot made Sean open his eyes and come to his senses. He saw that the muzzle of the revolver was pointed at him. Amanda said that before she killed him, she wanted him to know that she was only using it for the gun and the car. She then
pulled the trigger, shooting Sean right in the face. Amanda took a picture of Sean's bloody face to post on social media and drove off, leaving him bleeding on the side of the road from the gunshot wound. Now, she was on the run alone. They had guns, firearms, they had stolen them from a relative's house, and they had already bought ammunition and magazines for the same weapon, said Police Captain New. They both seemed to be in agreement on what was going to happen, and it was going to start with the murder of Charles Taylor. Police were on the trail, and Amanda continued to post notes. In her next social media post, she revealed that she took Sean's life. While at a traffic stop in a field, Amanda took a picture of a silver revolver in her lap and posted it to Instagram with a caption. The post was more like a suicide note. "Okay, it's about that time. I'm going to find my husband in hell and finally find peace. I love you, Mom, and my beautiful children, and I know you will give them the life I could never give them. I will finally be free." The cops were actively monitoring Amanda's account in hopes of tracking her down, and they did. Surveillance video from gas stations along the route of the white SUV the perpetrators fled in also helped police get on the trail. Cell tower signals were able to locate Amanda on a North Carolina state highway. Patrol officers spotted the white SUV heading east on I-40 near Asheville when she tried to stop. No matter how much she ran, she didn't give up without a fight. Law enforcement prepared, they knew she was armed and extremely dangerous. This reality was further reinforced by another sobering social media post that surfaced later that day that said, "Okay, the time is about to come when I find my husband in hell and finally become one with him." In her photo, Amanda looks smug, like she's proud of what she's done. After a 2-mile stretch of spikes that were strategically placed in Amanda's path, eventually all the destruction and chaos was over. Amanda was taken into custody around 8 o'clock the next morning. Police officers pulled Amanda out of the car and handcuffed her. Sean was found dying on the side of the road by paramedics. In the interrogation room, Amanda acted as if she didn't care about what was happening. She was sipping a soft drink and playing with her hair before Captain Robert New and another detective walked in. When questioned, Amanda waived her right to remain silent and confessed to everything. She really did look like she felt at home. After talking to the investigators, Amanda learned that Sean wasn't dead. The bullet had gone right through his jaw, causing him to pass out from the pain, but otherwise leaving no marks on him. Then, in a blood-chilling revelation, Amanda announced that she wanted to go to the death chamber. "Do you have a choice? I would prefer just the death penalty," Amanda says in the interrogation tape. "I kill people. I deserve to die. It would be better if I just go. It would be better for my children if I could just get the death penalty and go." Then, in a stunning turn of events, Amanda found herself recanting her words and pleading not guilty in front of the court. But at the trial, Amanda did recount her crime in great detail and insisted that she had done the right thing in taking the life of old Charles, who had taken Rex from her. She said that at first she'd been very angry with Rex for doing that to her, but then she'd been more angry with his father. Amanda admitted that she wanted Charles to feel the same pain that she had felt. Her argument was that she had killed Charles because she blamed him for the death of her husband Rex, whom Charles had allegedly given illegal substances to, according to Amanda. And the moment Charles started talking about Rex again, Amanda looked at him and started stabbing him, and it became the most alive thing she had felt since Rex had died. She admitted that she was very happy in those moments when the knife entered her father-in-law. Finally, Amanda vented all of her accumulated hatred and anger. She did it to get attention, and by not pleading guilty, she got the opportunity to talk about the case, said Captain Robert New. Amanda's explanation is disgusting. After all, she compares the feeling of the crime to a happy memory. At the November 2015 trial, the jury heard how Amanda stabbed Charles 31 times, and that she aimed for his face and chest. It took the jury just 30 minutes to find Amanda Taylor guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison. The judge called her the epitome of evil. As part of the plea bargain, Sean Ball agreed to a suspended 60-year sentence after 41 years in prison. Sean admitted that he is not worthy of sympathy and is completely remorseful for what he did. But there is a guilt that he has to live with every day and wonder what caused this to happen in his life. Sean Ball was jailed for 41 years after admitting to second-degree murder as part of a plea bargain. The 60-year prison sentence was suspended, except that Ball had to serve 41 years and 1 month. Amanda recently appealed her conviction and lost. She said she plans to appeal her conviction to the Supreme Court if she has to. Obviously, Amanda didn't become a serial offender, but she gained notoriety as a killer selfie taker. Amanda Taylor made a heartbreaking confession during a phone interview for a popular show from prison. When asked about why she took selfies with her body, she said, "I was just really excited and thought I wanted to take a picture so I could post it and show everyone. It made me really happy finally." She said she has absolutely no remorse for what she did to Charles Taylor, because she did exactly what she wanted to do. Amazingly, during this time, she gave a local reporter a phone interview in which she compared the thrill of being stabbed to riding a roller coaster. She said, "It was like my first roller coaster ride because of all the nerves and the feeling of freedom. That's how I felt. It wasn't what I had in mind at all. It's not what you see in the movies. It's a real animal sensation." Amanda Taylor had committed a terrible crime and wanted more. People who knew Amanda Taylor described her as a very dark and sinister woman who was obsessed with death, crime, and serial offenders from a young age. Her social media pages were filled with images of bizarre death scenes. If any woman has ever gone insane, it's Amanda Taylor, and it's so often the case that it wasn't supposed to happen. The people who loved her tried their best to stop her madness, and the people she turned to for help turned a blind eye. Now Amanda is being punished for all the destruction she was so encouraged by. This is how the career of Amanda Taylor, who dreamed of becoming a famous serial criminal, ended. Each of us goes through different phases in life, going through our own traumas and experiences. And when we look at bad heroes, learn about their past, we unwittingly try it on ourselves. Admit it. Have you ever dreamed of killing the neighbor who listens to music loudly at night or pisses you off because he parks in your spot? But reconsider the story, and better just shout by the lake or in the woods. They say it calms and returns moral balance. Not a good morning. A woman's corpse was found 5 miles outside of Wayland, Massachusetts, in the early morning hours of July 4, 2011. The find was discovered by a woman riding a bicycle whose path took her near a swampy area. While riding, she was admiring the scenery. Suddenly, her attention was drawn to something fanciful and out of place. When curiosity got the better of her, the woman came closer and was horrified. Not far from the road, a dead girl lay among the grass and mud. To all appearances, the poor girl had not drowned, but had encountered unprecedented cruelty. A wound was visible on her neck, and a bungee cord was tangled in her hair. Coping with her excitement, the bystander dialed emergency services and reported what she had seen. Suddenly, her plans for the day changed. She put aside her business and waited for the police. Upon arriving on the scene, law enforcement officers pulled the body onto dry land and examined it, after which it was immediately sent for forensic examination. The girl had been in the water for a short time, so her appearance had not undergone significant changes. Officers recognized 18-year-old Lauren Astley, universally wanted since the previous evening. Lauren had been reported missing the previous day after she failed to return home or turn up for a meeting with friends. CCTV cameras recorded her entering the shopping center where she worked as a sales clerk at around 10 a.m. on July 3rd and leaving the building at 6:45 p.m. after finishing her shift. It was established that Astley was on the phone with someone at this time. Unfortunately, that was the last time she was seen alive. She was never heard from after that. Malcolm, the heroine's father, began to worry. After all, his daughter was characterized by punctuality and was true to her word. Therefore, if she had said she would be home by the appointed time, she would do so. She would not change her route for no apparent reason. At most, she would have reported that she was running late. Mr. Astley therefore realized that something bad had happened, and without wasting time, reported the disappearance to the police. The police officers did not wait for the allotted time and started the search immediately. In parallel, the girl's family and friends joined in. By the way, word of mouth worked quickly, and the news that she was missing instantly spread among acquaintances. Soon in the parking lot of the local beach was found a red Jeep, the car of the missing. The car stood with the windows down, and her personal belongings, a purse and a laptop, lay inside the car. However, the girl herself was not in it. It was also unclear where she could have gone after leaving the vehicle so precariously. When Malcolm was informed of the discovery of the car, he immediately drove to the spot. There he tried to figure out where his daughter had gone. He walked along the shore and shone a flashlight into the water, looking for her as if she had drowned. Lauren's friends arrived after him. They decided to spend the night at the site, hoping to be the first to spot her. All night they scoured the area and wondered where Lauren had disappeared to. The young men didn't know what to think or where to look for her. However, none of them could imagine that something irreparable had happened to Lauren. It seemed like something that only happened in the movies. The person you had been talking and laughing with not so long ago couldn't just disappear like that. Not 12 hours later, Lauren's body was found. The first person the officers called was her father. They informed about the terrible discovery and asked to come to the identification. Malcolm's eyes to the last refused to believe that the girl lying on the pathologist's table, his daughter. However, coming to his senses, the man officially recognized his child. In front of him lay his girl, young and bright, who recently had her whole life ahead of her. Unbearable pain pierced the man's heart. Nevertheless, nothing could be brought back or undone. At this point, he had to do two important things: to report the terrible news to his former spouse and find the culprit in the death of his daughter. When the sad news spread throughout the city, no one could not believe what had happened. Family and close acquaintances in one voice said that Lauren had no enemies or ill-wishers. The only one on whom suspicion involuntarily fell was her ex-boyfriend, Nathaniel Fujita. His name was spoken with great hesitation, as everyone knew how much he loved Lauren and would never hurt her. However, the deformations that happen to a person who has gone through a breakup are different, and who knows what someone who is unable to let go of the past is capable of. First love. First love is a very strong feeling. Coming into a person's life, it changes it completely, ruins the usual way of life. Such emotions nourish and inspire, dilute reality with new colors. Together with it comes the first kiss, the first intimate experience, the first departure from the parental home, the first job, and so on. This is a very vivid segment of life, when some sensations are superimposed on others. But often such love is fleeting. Someone breaks up because they are separated by circumstances, someone could not cope with the resulting contradictions, and someone simply realized that they do not fit each other. After that, there remains a certain incompleteness and understatement, which excites until the end of days. One way or another, but most of us go through it. However, not everyone has the fortitude to get over it and move on, to thank the person for the time spent and say goodbye to them. This story is about the flip side of love, the heavy addiction and jealousy that ruined young hearts. Lauren Astley and Nathaniel Fujita are the envy of the entire high school. She is a petite, pretty brown girl who stands out from everyone with her activity and uniqueness. He is a tall, ambitious soccer player, the object of adoration of many girls. Despite the fact that young people were acquainted from an early age, they revealed themselves to each other later. Their relationship began in high school and lasted 3 years. It was a very colorful romance with all the consequences. They fought and made up. They would break up and get back together. Both had a difficult character, but the lovers tried to cherish the fragile feeling that arose between them. This continued, at least for the first few years of their relationship. Lauren Dunn Astley was born in 1993 in Boston. She was the only child in the family of Mary and Malcolm. From this, their attention was completely focused on the little girl. Since both parents worked as teachers, important values were instilled in her from an early age. Their most important wish was for their daughter to grow up to be a good person. When Lauren was 6 years old, the couple Astley divorced. However, this did not affect the upbringing of the girl.
Each of them still continued to care about her and support Lauren in all endeavors, and they have a young beauty was a lot. She was constantly fascinated by something, and her whole day was scheduled by the minute. Her versatile interests were amazing. Lauren was fond of tennis and soccer, sang in a musical group, and was a member of the Youth Symphony Orchestra. She was also a member of her church choir, a counselor at a children's camp, and had a starring role in a theater production of Annie at the local arts center. No school or town concert was without her participation. Many were amazed by her irrepressible energy. She was active and omnipresent. The second direction of the girl's hobbies was social activity. Ashley participated in many charitable actions. At the age of 12, she helped victims of Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, Louisiana. Afterward, she visited the area 2 more times on a similar mission. She had a big and kind heart, open to the world and people. Therefore, she cared for others more than she cared for herself. Everyone around her knew that she could be called upon at any time for help or advice. Nathaniel Fujita went to high school with Lauren. He was an outstanding player on the school soccer team and showed great promise. By the way, he also dreamed of connecting his future life with sports. He was known as a diligent student and the soul of the company. The young man was the eldest son of Beta and Tom Fujita. It can be said that his family was prosperous and quite famous in certain circles. His father was a famous guitarist and professor at Berklee College of Music in Boston. He was different from many and was an unconventional person. Perhaps the romantic relationship between Lauren and Nate just on this ground. One day, the girl interviewed the boyfriend's father for a school assignment. After that, she began to appear in their house more often, and when young people stopped hiding their feelings, their parents began to communicate and go to visit each other. As I said earlier, the first 2 years of the relationship between the lovers were perfect. They were very attractive young people, and their couple was eye-catching. Nate and Lori did everything together, going out, playing sports, studying, and participating in activities. However, later on, from such a close connection became stuffy. The guy did not let the girl go anywhere alone and controlled everywhere. He was jealous of her to every pillar, and often he saw things that were not. Nathaniel wanted to get all her attention and not share it with anyone. This was the reason for the conflicts between them. They became more frequent as the young man began to react more aggressively. But at the same time, no one heard Lauren complain about any physical impact. In general, their relationship became like an emotional seesaw. The state of calm was lost. It didn't suit both of them, but they couldn't go back to their previous easy feelings anymore. Lauren more than once thought about the future, and closer to the end of her schooling decided on her future life. She outlined all the pros and cons of her relationship with Nate on a sheet of paper and clearly realized that it was time to say goodbye. She'd also always disliked the way he acted around her mom. Lauren had unwittingly projected their relationship onto her supposed life with him, and she didn't want that kind of behavior. On top of that, the impending enrollment played a big part. Their life paths were already diverging. Lauren was applying to Ilona University in North Carolina, and her boyfriend was invited to Trinity College in Connecticut to play soccer there. Breakup. Lauren announced the fateful decision on April 1st, 2011, on her birthday. She considered it the best timing, as there was still time ahead to come to terms with new realities and start their lives with a clean slate. Everyone had new acquaintances and busyness ahead of them that would help push the sad thoughts away. Nathaniel, however, did not share Lauren's aspirations. He felt a deep sense of loss and loneliness. He was no longer excited about going to college. He stopped practicing and partying. All he did all day was lie on the couch and watch TV. The guy fell into a deep depression that he could no longer control. All around noted that from a formerly active and energetic young man, he turned into a withdrawn and depressed. In addition, Fujita became addicted to alcohol and pot. In this way, he wanted to distract himself from the harsh reality. It was hard for Lauren to see him like that, much less be the cause of it. The girl asked her friends for advice on what to do in such a case and how to help him. But everyone recommended her not to interfere and to give him time to get over this pain on his own. Otherwise, he could regard her participation as a chance that everything could be corrected and returned. Her friend's advice was sound. She shouldn't have shown her face to him, for at the sight of her, his condition worsened. Unfortunately, the girl had become his trigger. Looking a little ahead, in the aftermath, her kindness and desire to help turned against her. After graduation, Astley, along with her friends, organized a big party, which was attended by about 150 people. The event was held under a huge dome, where young people danced and had fun. Among the invitees also turned out and the ex-boyfriend of the heroine. At the party, Nathan came quite drunk. Seeing Lauren dancing in the middle of the dance floor, he approached her to talk, but she asked him not to bother her and not to ruin the party. There was no point in having idle conversations. Everything had been said several times before. And secondly, she did not want to communicate with him in such a state. However, the guy kept up with her and asked her to start all over again. With each passing minute, his mood worsened, and his aggression manifested itself with greater force. At one point, he became so angry that he stepped aside and hit the pole holding the structure with all his might. In response, the structure staggered and collapsed. The celebration was hopelessly ruined. Everyone expressed displeasure and a desire for Nathan to leave the party. Later, Lauren came to her mother in tears and confessed to her that the former boyfriend does not leave her alone and follows her everywhere. The girl added that at the graduation event, he wouldn't let anyone dance with her and behave disgustingly. He was angry that she was happy without him. Suspect. When the police learned Lauren was missing, the first thing they did was to question everyone she was close to. One way or another, all roads led to Fujita. Only he seemed to have a motive to harm her. However, his entire entourage assured her otherwise. However, officers in the course of their practice had more than once come across cases where crimes were committed by people who were not expected to do so. Nathaniel and his mother met the detectives on the doorstep. During the conversation, the boy looked confused. He seemed impressed by the sudden disappearance of his beloved. He admitted that he had seen her recently, around 7 o'clock in the evening. The girl stopped by him in her car, after which they had a nice conversation, and then she drove away. According to the guy, their conversation did not take more than 5 minutes. In addition, the young man added that at the time of Lauren's disappearance, he was at home and did not go anywhere. True, his alibi was difficult to confirm since he was alone at the time. His mother agreed with her son's words. Mrs. Fujita admitted that she had also seen Nathan's ex-girlfriend that day. She visited her at the mall where the latter worked part-time. The woman was saddened by the changes that had occurred in her son. That's why she asked Lauren to talk to him. The fact is that the parents of the young man had already sought help from a psychiatrist, but his services were ineffective. Their son had lost all interest in life and just existed. Beta hoped Lauren's words would give him strength, or at least a sense of male pride in him so he could move on. The request had put a crimp in Lauren's plans, but the meeting wasn't supposed to take a long time, so no one knew about it. It turned out that the phone conversation recorded by the mall's security cameras had taken place between her and Nathan just after the meeting with his mother. The girl was still continuing to worry about her ex-boyfriend, so she dialed him and arranged to see him. At 7:05 p.m., Astley drove up to Fujita's house and sent a text message with the word "here." The information that Nathaniel and Beta provided was certainly valuable information for the police officers. However, it was not clear where Lauren had gone after that and why her car was left open on the beach. The case became clearer in the morning when the body of the poor girl was accidentally found in the swamp. Convinced that the corpse of the girl probably belongs to Lauren Astley, the detectives decided to visit Nathan again. This time, however, he was not at home. They didn't need his presence, though. The officers had a search warrant, needed evidence to confirm the version of the investigation about the involvement of the former lover in the murder. The examination began with the garage. Experienced specialists immediately became clear that something bad had happened in it. Somewhere on the floor were found bloodstains, and on the wall in a prominent place hung several elastic cords. They matched those tangled in the murdered girl's hair. Traces of blood were also found in the house. The doorknob, kitchen floor, kitchen sink, and bathroom sink contained faint splatters. It was obvious that someone had tried to mop them up, but had done so sloppily and apparently in a hurry. A black gym bag was found in the basement.
Inside it were wet and muddy tennis shoes. In Nathan's bedroom, in a kind of hiding place, detectives found a pair of bloody shoes, wet, bloody clothes. The mud found on the shoes seemed to match the mud from the swamp where Lauren's body had been located. But the samples found had to be submitted to a lab for an official conclusion. Time later, experts confirmed the detectives' assumptions. They also determined that the blood found in Fujita's house belonged to the deceased. Undeniable evidence of Nathan's involvement in the ex-girlfriend's death had been obtained. However, his whereabouts were still unknown. Therefore, soon, the guy was declared wanted. The investigation of the case progressed with inconceivable speed. A few hours later, the suspect was found. All this time, he was staying with a cousin in a neighboring town. Eventually, on the morning of July 5, 2011, Nathaniel was arrested on suspicion of murder. At the time of his arrest, he was aloof and quiet, and offered no resistance. At the same time, he did not cooperate with the investigation during interrogation. He didn't say anything about the crime he was charged with. The detectives had two thoughts about it. Either he could not find an excuse for his behavior, or he was afraid to say too much. So he didn't say a word. Investigators' version. The investigation believed that Lauren Astley visited the ex-boyfriend after meeting with his mother. The girl was worried about him, so she decided to talk to him and cheer him up a little. After that, the two of them proceeded to Fujita's garage. There, a quarrel may have taken place, after which Nathan attacked her and began to strangle her with a bungee cord. After killing the girl, he drove her red Jeep to the beach and threw the car keys into a storm drain. By the way, they were later found. The intruder then returned home, put his lover in his car, and drove her to the swamp. Following this, he tried to hide the traces of the crime. Despite the fact that he had not previously been physically violent towards Lauren, it was obvious to everyone that her boyfriend was periodically unrestrained and capable of aggression. Thus, his motives were unwillingness to come to terms with the breakup and underlying resentment. During a preliminary hearing on August 23, 2011, Nathaniel was charged with first-degree felony assault and battery with a dangerous weapon. When the boyfriend was asked if he would plead guilty to the crimes charged, he barely audibly uttered, "No." So it became clear that his lawyers had engaged in foul play, having come up with a certain line of conduct and defense. As a result, the prosecutor filed a motion to keep the defendant in jail without the possibility of bail. The court granted the prosecutor's request. Trial. On February 13, 2013, Fujita appeared in court. Nathaniel's attorney, William Sullivan, pleaded the defendant's insanity. He did not deny that a murder had been committed, however. He stated the following. On the evening of July 3, 2011, due to severe clinical depression, the defendant had a psychopathic attack. At that time, the guy was unable to give an account of his actions, so he attacked the girl. Nathan's friends confirmed the words of the defender in terms of changes in his behavior. They told about the fact that he really changed and stopped appearing in the company. Everyone was struck by the fact that previously he was just sick of soccer and did not miss training even during illness. And after parting with Lauren overnight, he stopped being interested in something that was a huge part of his life. The psychiatrist that Fujita visited also spoke at the court hearing. It was he who diagnosed his patient and suggested medication and therapy. However, Nathaniel refused. At trial, it was suggested that the defendant's mental health problems may have stemmed not only from the painful breakup, but primarily because of the athlete's numerous repetitive head injuries. And the breakup exacerbated the situation and triggered a severe seizure. However, the prosecution was not in agreement with the arguments of the defense attorney. Prosecutor Lisa McGovern said that the defendant was aware of what was happening, acted in a planned and calculated manner, and the crime was committed out of base motives. It was found that the guy constantly stalked the girl and did not give her peace. Even that day, a few hours before the end of her working day, he appeared in the shopping center and watched her, which is confirmed by CCTV footage. And Lauren's situation at his mother's request was an opportunity for Nathan to put his criminal intent into action. Witness testimony corroborated the prosecution's case. Fujita was clearly unrepentant. One eyewitness reported seeing Nathan returning home on the unfortunate evening and music playing in his car. A cousin also gave denunciatory testimony against a relative. She said that on the evening of July 3rd, her brother called her and offered to hang out, but the girl was busy, so she refused, to what he got very angry and said that he wanted to distract himself, but apparently it will not work. The next day, when the news of Lauren's death became known, his cousin contacted him again. She asked him if he knew, to which he replied that no one would ever know the truth about her death or where the murder weapon was located. In addition, he admitted that he had driven the ex's car to the town beach. Thus, the sister realized that Nathaniel was involved in the incident and persuaded him to turn himself in. It turned out that in 2009, when the young people broke up once again, there was one curious incident. Lauren, together with her friends, went to the disco. There was a guy who did not hide his interest in her. After the breakup, Lauren decided to give a chance to a new admirer, and they even kissed. But Nathan saw this and lunged at his rival with his fists. He threatened to slit the young man's throat if he ever came near Lauren again. So it was clear that Nathan was a jealous man. And when he drank alcohol, he lost his temper and became capable of many things, especially given the nature of the injuries Lauren had sustained as a result of the murder. This event confirmed Fujita's violent rage and also indirectly pointed to him as the culprit. In addition, other heinous circumstances came to light. The body of the deceased was found to have wounds that had been inflicted before her death. Among them, there were clear signs of so-called defensive wounds. The girl had tried to resist. A forensic psychiatrist invited by the prosecution also assessed the defendant's condition. However, unlike the previous one, he stated that at the time of the crime, he was in his right mind and made informed decisions. The fierce struggle between the prosecution and the defense came down to the fact that if Fujita was found insane, his sentence would be significantly reduced. Of course, this did not absolve him of the charges, but it did greatly diminish his guilt. This trial was emotional in every sense. In attendance were relatives on both sides. These men had previously been friends with each other. In this situation, they were each hurting in their own way. Nathaniel's parents cried the whole time. They could not believe what had happened and felt immense guilt for their son. The weight of his actions fell on the shoulders of his loved ones. Mary and Malcolm were heartbroken. They had lost their only daughter prematurely. Lauren was dying in agony at the hands of the man she loved. Specialists concluded that the girl had lived for several minutes after the cord around her throat was tightened and cut. Lauren's mother wanted to understand why this had happened to her daughter and how long it had been planned. The verdict and life afterward. After a 3-week trial, on March 7, 2013, Nathaniel Fujita was found guilty on all charges. The jury took 1 day to reach a final verdict. The 20-year-old was sentenced to life in prison without parole. After the verdict, Lauren's father walked up to Nathan's parents and hugged them. His act showed the strength of the man's character and the depth of his heart. Both families had lost the most precious thing they had. Mary and Malcolm Astley later established the Lauren Dunn Astley Memorial Fund to teach teens about healthy relationships. They believe that the crime Nathaniel committed was preventable. The girl's family has dedicated their future lives to spreading awareness on how to avoid couple violence and get over a breakup. In 2024, the State Superior Court abolished mandatory life without parole sentences for those under the age of 20 at the time of the offense. Thus, Nathaniel had the opportunity to be free. Is that fair? Considering that he took the life of an innocent girl forever and deprived her parents of happiness and peace. There is an opinion that from love to hate is one step. Obsessive love combined with bouts of jealousy and selfishness sometimes leads to crazy acts. The story of the Fujita and Astley families is a sad example of this.